Oops. I'm unmuting. I muted everyone, so you may want to just individually mute your lines there. Okay. So anyone in chambers should put their mute on. Yeah. Councillor Madigan is just getting up and running, and once he's on screen, we'll start the meeting. We'll wait, Bob. We just want, because it's being televised, so I'll make sure that everyone knows who's present.
If you had an EDHTV, could you have 25 of us on there? Yeah.
People have thumped their heads walking under it. I wasn't asked for an ID. Well, maybe because you weren't in this morning. Aaron Bob's getting a request for an ID number. It might try clicking the link again. Sometimes if you install Zoom, it doesn't pick up the link.
You and I are the only ones that have nothing behind us for contacts. Like, we could have a green screen and be in like Hawaii taking part of the meeting.
We're good. Yeah.
Yeah, if I just, I'm not really using them or anything.
Yeah, that should be fine.
Okay, thank you. You want to actually join that camera so you can see your face. Oh, good. There you go. Yeah. No, on the side. Yeah. Shade button. Yeah. There we go. Thank you. Okay. All right, Council, it's 1:35, and I will call this special meeting of Council to order. These are unprecedented times, and we are now pioneering our teleconference and audio conference meeting structure. So I'm going to call a roll call, and after I've called your name, I'd ask each member to say aye, so that we have on the record that everyone is here. Councillor Hamlin.
Here.
Councillor Jeffrey?
Here.
Councillor Berman? Here. Councillor Doherty?
Here.
Councillor Madigan? Here. Councillor Comey?
Here.
Councillor McLeod?
Here.
Deputy Mayor Hall?
Here.
And Mayor Saunderson? Here.
Today we acknowledge that this event is taking place on the traditional territory of the Indigenous peoples of Turtle Island, including the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and the Ojibwe peoples, and on lands connected with the Lake Simcoe and Ottawasaga Treaty of 1818. This is the home of a diverse range of Indigenous peoples whom we recognize as contemporary stewards of the land and vital contributors of our society. For our public, the meeting today is being live streamed on Rogers TV and as well on the Town of Collingwood YouTube channel. If there are any issues with the reception, please let us know immediately, and we will make sure that those are corrected. As I indicated at the outset, these are unprecedented times, and with the COVID-19 threat, we have seen our federal government, provincial government, and the County of Simcoe declare various states of emergency and put in emergency measures. We at Town Hall in Collingwood, while it is not business as usual, it is certainly all business at Town Hall, and with the hard work of staff, we had put in place a business continuity plan approximately 10 days ago, and we are continuing on that basis. So while Town Hall and our local municipal facilities are closed to the public, we are working extremely hard to make sure that we continue to meet your needs and protect your interests, and that we are available through our customer service portals, whether it be online or by phone. And we at Town Hall, and with the hard work of staff, we have in place a business getting a bit of playback here. And so I want to remind our residents that we are here and working hard to protect your interests in this time, and that we are available for your suggestions, for your input, and for your comments. We have heard both the Prime Minister and our Premier talk about the essential need for our residents to respect social distancing, proper hand washing, and staying inside except for absolutely necessary errands. And we look to our public to do that so that we can get ourselves through this crisis as soon as possible and with minimal impacts, both in terms of health and our economy. And I have seen, as I look out, our community do that, so I would encourage all of you to continue to do that so that we can get through this crisis as soon as possible. With that said, I will look for the adoption of the agenda, and it is moved by Deputy Mayor Hall and seconded by Councillor MacLeod. Be it resolved that the content of the Special Council agenda for March 25, 2020 be adopted as presented. And I will again go through the roll call so that we are assured that we've got the numbers here. So starting with you, Councillor Hamlin.
How would you like?
How do you vote?
Yay.
Yay, thank you. Councillor Jeffrey.
In favor.
Councillor Berman.
In favor.
Councillor Doherty.
In favor.
Councillor Madigan.
In favor.
Councillor Comey.
In favor.
Councillor MacLeod.
In favor.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor.
In favor.
And I am in favor as well. So that is carried unanimously. Thank you. Declarations of pecuniary interest and the general nature thereof. Are there any declarations? Seeing none, should any of you find yourself in that position as we progress, please let me know. Before I get into the adoption of the minutes, I am going to move forward with the motion that we amend our procedural bylaw so that we can get that on the table and have that in place as we continue through the meeting. So it's moved by Deputy Mayor Hall and seconded by Councillor MacLeod. Be it resolved, the bylaw 2020-20 being a bylaw to amend procedural bylaw 2019-75 to include provisions for electronic participation for council and standing committee during a state of emergency be enacted and passed this 25th day of March 2020. And I will look to Clerk Almas to take us through that.
Certainly, we do have a slide that's posted as well. So through your worship to members of the council and the public that are watching, as a result of the province enacting the Municipal Emergency Act 2020 that was passed on March the 19th, they provided a discretionary ability for municipalities to use electronic participation for public meetings and closed sessions when an emergency is declared. So either provincial federal, provincial, municipal, or a health unit can declare an emergency as well, which all falls under these parameters. So what we are proposing in the bylaw that's being presented to council today is the use of electronic participation, and that means full participation. So a quorum of council is not required to be present at a meeting. Everybody can participate remotely. We are also including a component regarding the vote taking. In the event, right now we have the video conferencing aspect, so most individuals can see how people have voted, but we've also provided for the roll call provision. So that is one minor amendment that we made to that bylaw today for your consideration, is that in the event that roll call isn't necessary, that the chair may use that discretion not to use roll call. And that could be for items of non-substantive matters as well.
Thank you, Clerk. Have there been any issues with the audio on the live feed? Did everyone hear that? Okay, so then, are there any questions or comments from council about the bylaw to amend our procedural bylaw to enable us to have these electronic meetings? Councillor Berman.
Thank you, Mayor Summerson. Just a clarification on Part E, where it says that this is under declared state of emergency. Is that by any of the 3 levels of government that you just stated?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
And for the record, we've got provincial government that's declared a state of emergency, as well as our Simcoe County upper tier government. So I think we're covered under both sections 4 and 7.0.1, I think, of the Emergency Procedures Act. All right. Are there any other questions? Seeing none, I will. Councillor McLeod? Oh, go ahead, Councillor McLeod.
Just to, there was a little bit of audio problem for me during Clerk Almus's explanation, but I believe I've caught the most of it now. Just for my edification, this is temporary only during periods of emergency. This format is not going to be something we adopt on a Monday to Friday basis once this crisis is over.
No, it's for emergency circumstances only, and I'll look to the clerk to confirm that.
Certainly, through your worship to Councillor McLeod, we are keeping the provision that we added in the bylaw at our meeting on March the 16th. So if there is not a state of declared emergency, however, it is an urgent matter, we are continuing to allow council participation, but in that aspect, physical quorum would have to be present still.
Thank you so much for that clarification.
Are there any other comments or questions, council, before I call the vote? Seeing none, then I will call the vote, and again, we'll do it by roll call. So I will start with Councillor Jeffrey.
In favor.
Councillor Berman.
In favor.
Councillor Doherty.
Aye.
Councillor Madigan.
In favor.
Councillor Comey.
In favor.
Councillor McLeod.
In favor?
Deputy Mayor.
In favor.
I am in favor. And Councillor Hamlin.
In favor.
Thank you. That is passed unanimously. So the adoption of minutes. It's moved by Deputy Mayor Hall, seconded by Councillor McLeod. Be it resolved that the minutes of the following council meetings be approved as presented. Regular meeting of council held February 24, 2020. Special meeting of council held March 4, 2020. Emergency meeting of council held March 13, 2020. And regular meeting of council held March 16, 2020. Are there any comments or questions, council? Seeing none, I will call the vote, and we will start this time with Councillor Berman.
In favor.
Councillor Doherty.
In favor.
Councillor Madigan.
In favor.
Councillor Comey.
In favor.
Councillor McLeod.
In favor?
And Deputy Mayor.
In favor?
I am in favor. Councillor Hamlin
In favor?
and Councillor Jeffrey,
In favor.
and that is passed unanimously. We will now go to community announcements, and I will start with the Deputy Mayor.
I have nothing today, Your Worship.
Thank you. Councillor McLeod.
Thank you. Only that we switch off the PowerPoint presentation that's currently on screen.
Thank you.
And
Councillor, sorry, go ahead.
that's all. Thank you.
Councillor Comey.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. You know, our Prime Minister did something similar earlier in the week, and I know my two kids are home from school, so I would like to say a really big thank you to all of the kids of Collingwood. We know how much they're missing their classmates and their teammates and being able to go to the playground. So we want them to know how much we appreciate them taking the family dog around the block for the 100th time in the day. We know it's frustrating and not easy, but it's making such an important difference to our community. And I know we all appreciate it so much. So thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Madigan.
Nothing, Your Worship.
Councillor Doherty.
I have nothing, Your Worship.
Councillor Jeffrey.
Nothing except to add to Councillor Comey's, I think my grandkids are missing, so. Nothing else.
Well, they can watch you now.
Oh, actually, I can, there is something. Thank you, Councillor Berman. At 7:30 PM, Your Worship, you had circulated the item about showing support for our healthcare workers and frontline. I've added frontline workers because I want to add anybody who's putting themselves out there on our behalf to keep us safer. And so my neighbors have joined me, and I know there's growing numbers across Collingwood that are getting to, at the end of their laneways or out of their balconies or off their back decks to make noise with anything, pots and pans or music makers. I know a piper is out on West Street, so it's all good. So I hope at 7:30 we can have a louder noise every evening out of Collingwood until this challenge is past us.
Well said. Thank you. And Councillor Berman.
Nothing for me, thank you.
Councillor Hamlin.
Nothing for me, thank you.
Moving on then to the 6.1, which is the FCM 2020 Sustainable Communities Award application, Smart Stormwater Partnership. It is moved by Deputy Mayor Hall, seconded by Councillor McLeod. Wrong one, sorry. Same movers and seconders, so that doesn't change. Be it resolved that Council support the FCM 2020 Sustainable Communities Award application, Smart Stormwater Partnership, to be submitted by Greenland Engineering, and a letter of endorsement be provided by the town in support of the application. I don't know if there's any background you'd like to give, Councillor Jeffrey, as our FCM.
Thank you, Mayor Saunderson. Only to say it's a very worthy award application to submit to FCM. It's been a very successful project, and it was unanimously supported at our DevOps meeting.
Any other questions or comments, Council?
And as clarification,
I have-
was my for submission March 31st.
Yes, there was an upcoming deadline, yes. Go ahead.
It's Councillor Doherty. I see no reference or mention of Greenland in this letter of endorsement. Is that the way it was supposed to read?
I don't know if you have an answer for that.
There were many partners.
Yeah.
And I know Greenland is doing the submission through you, Mayor Saunderson.
And I think Councillor Doherty, Mark Palmer from Greenland was here to talk about the smart stormwater initiatives, from the sump pump to the rain grid. And my understanding, this is an application for grant funding through FCM to proceed with that. And as Councillor Jeffrey has indicated, there are a number of partners involved.
Okay, thank you.
Seeing no other comments or questions, then I will call the vote. I'm trying to keep track here. I'm now going to start with you, Councillor Doherty.
In support?
Councillor Madigan?
In favor.
Councillor Comey?
Sorry, yes, in favor.
Good, thank you. Councillor McLeod?
In favor.
I am in favor. Councillor Hamlin?
In favor.
Councillor Jeffrey?
In favor?
And Councillor Berman? Thank you. And that is
I'm in favor as well.
Oh, sorry, Deputy Mayor, did I? I'm only getting the bottom half of your face, so I guess I didn't recognize you. My apologies. Next on the agenda then is staff reports, and item 7.1 is CAO report 2020-02, COVID-19 economic and other relief measures. I will pass it over to Bree.
Thank you, Your Worship. And before I get into my presentation, I just want to make a couple of comments. The first one is this is a fairly lengthy presentation, and my staff will tell you that I violated every single rule that I invented on PowerPoint presentation, which is lots of white space and keep it to 8 to 10 pages. So my apologies to all my staff. This is not an example you should follow. But these are unprecedented times, and I think it warrants us to try and be as fulsome as we can. So I apologize in advance for the lengthy nature of this presentation. I also want to preface my comment by saying that I want to say thank you to the Mayor and members of Council for their support over the last several weeks. This has indeed been a challenging time for staff across the organization, and the support we receive from the Mayor and members of Council has been great in boosting the morale of staff and keeping us going. I also want to express my ongoing gratitude for the department heads. We've been having discussions, as many of you know, for the last 2 weeks, every single day, and the collaboration I've seen across this organization is an example of the high-performing 21st century organization that we have built. I have every confidence that the people who work in the Collingwood Public Service will continue to deliver quality service to our residents and to our businesses. So I want to say a heartfelt thank you to all the staff across the organization, in particular those staff who are on the front line of service delivery. Over the last several weeks as well, we've had extensive consultation, not only amongst our staff, but also with the business community. We've tried as best as we can to engage the public, and we've also had consultation and communication with the Chamber of Commerce. So what you see before you is a consolidation of the recommendations that's coming from the broader community as well as staff across the organization. One of the consistent themes that we heard throughout that consultation is the need for the town to continue to demonstrate leadership. People are looking to us for information, and credible information comes from the municipality. And I've said to some of you over the last several weeks that people can despair on their own. What they need is for us to provide leadership and inspiration to them. And hopefully by taking some bold steps today, we can demonstrate to the community that in times of need, government is there for them. And more importantly, this local government, this municipality is there to support our residents and support our business community. What you have on slide 3 is a number of recommendations before you that are articulated in the staff report. The intention here is to bring forward some recommendations for immediate actions. And some of these measures, as you would have noticed, have a significant financial impact on the community and on the municipality in particular, and I'll go through some of those during my presentation. We're also looking at providing adequate opportunities for the public to engage us in their comments and their feedback. And I guess I'm happy to report that as we speak, we have actually put a consolidated portal on our website, on the Engage Collingwood website, to try and get feedback from our broader community. So that site is up and running. I'd encourage members of our community to log on to our website and provide us with your ongoing feedback. The clerk already addressed the necessary changes to our bylaw to allow for electronic participation as a result of the most recent changes at the provincial level to the Ontario Municipal Act. And finally, I want to report back to Council on some of the measures that have been put in place to try and ensure that we continue to provide business continuity. We've also included in the staff report a full suite of a number of options that we have considered. I'm not expecting Council to necessarily make a decision on those options today, but I wanted to get those considerations before you. So if and when we need to go there, you've got the financial information upon which you can base your choices. So that information on some of the more significant financial implications are there for your information, and not necessarily something that you need to decide on, but of course, Council can decide to go there if they're so inclined. I don't need to go through the information on the next slide that speaks to the significance of the COVID-19 pandemic. This is a global catastrophe. It affects almost every single country in the world. Every day the numbers are changing. We're looking at over 375,000 confirmed cases across the globe, and that number is probably up by now. If you log on to the WHO website, you'll probably see that information is going up. This is going to have a significant financial impact on the global economy, the like of which I don't think we've seen in our generation. This is going to be massive in terms of the amount of money that will be taken out of the economy, and we're seeing a lot of that right now. The health impact is what we're focusing on, as we should, but I think we also need to start thinking about what happens when we are able to plank the curve and we are in a state of some sense of normalcy as we try to rebuild the economy locally, regionally, provincially, nationally, and internationally. And there are some considerations in this report that will provide some guidance in that regard. In Canada as well, the numbers are changing. If you go on to the Canadian Federation of Independent Business website, you will discover that almost 66% of the small businesses across this country has closed or will close in the next couple of weeks. We're seeing hundreds of thousands of people being laid off. We saw close to 1 million applications for employment insurance in the last week alone. So the fall of this will be significant from a global perspective, and I think we have an obligation to ensure that we prepare our community to deal with the fallout. On this note, I think I'd be remiss if I don't echo some of the sentiments expressed by members of council, which is to encourage our residents to heed the warnings from public health. Stay home if you don't need to go out, and if you go out, please practice social distancing. It's really, really important that we follow the advice of our public health experts as we try to get a handle on this. The important consideration I heard this morning is that 48% of the new cases in Ontario was the result of community transmission. So we're seeing a movement from transmission associated with people who would have traveled to transmission that is more locally. So all the more reason why I think we need to ensure that we continue to practice social distancing, isolation if we have to, and stay home. In Canada, just before I came upstairs, the numbers of confirmed cases have risen to 1,959, so more than 300 in a day. And we've got over, the probable cases have actually almost doubled from 443 to 833. So this is the rapidity with which this thing is affecting the global and national and local community, and I think this is a serious issue. The mayor mentioned the responses from government. The federal legislation was passed by the House of Commons and it's now with the Senate. We're hoping that it will get royal assent soon and that these measures will be ready for implementation. Part of the challenge, I think, over the next couple of weeks would be the difficulty in mobilizing resources to support implementation of this. And I think this is something we heard loud and clear from the business community yesterday. I mentioned I hosted a virtual town hall with about 20-odd members of the business community, and one of the concerns they expressed to us was the inability to access the $82 billion stimulus package that was announced by the government, and perhaps more importantly, understand what's in that package, so if they need to access that money, they have some idea where to go and get the funding from. Today is significant in Ontario because the Minister of Finance, in about a couple of hours or so, will deliver the economic update. It's not a budget, it's an economic update. And it's important from our perspective because we are hoping that this economic update will include money for transfer partners. So we're hoping that the BPS will have some indication from the Government of Ontario as to the kind of money they're proposing on transferring to us, as well as the health sector, which obviously is top of mind for everyone at this stage. So as soon as that information is available, we'll make sure that we provide that information to Council. In terms of what we've done to date, I'm on slide 6. The impact that we're looking through which these things are being evaluated include measures that are meaningful to our community. Our community needs support now, and I think what we need to do is find a way of ensuring that we can get some support in the hands of the business community and residents now. We also need to ensure that whatever package we provide is affordable and transparent. The municipality, as many of you know, cannot run a deficit. So we need to be measured, we need to be deliberative, and we need to make sure that whatever we put in place is impactful. One of the concerns I have, and I've expressed this to the mayor, is the length of this crisis. So this is not something that I think we could respond to in one single package. I think we have to look at a significant juncture along the way and how we can provide some kind of ongoing support to our residents and businesses who look to us for critical support under these difficult times. And whatever support we put in place would have to be, if not collaborative, it has to be aligned with the provincial and federal support, so we're not working cross purposes. On the next slide, I identified what we have done to date, and as the mayor mentioned, although the front doors might be closed, there are a lot of staff who are working extra hard and extra long hours to try and ensure that we continue to provide the services that people expect from us, at least the critical services. So we have put in place, based on Council's approval at its last meeting, we put in place a business continuity plan, ensuring that we can deliver essential core services. We continue to deliver services by phone and by mail, and we're also looking at how we might be able to provide services by following some of the best practices and the protocols that would facilitate some level of interaction with the broader community. We've also, as many of you would know, we did accelerate some funding for the Out of the Cold program. This is in response to a direct request that we received from that organization. And I want to acknowledge the work that the Deputy Mayor and the Mayor did in this regard by bringing that to our attention. And thanks to staff for putting in place the measure to ensure that we got them the requisite support. And what they are doing is not dissimilar to what's happening across the county, where many of these organizations are actually putting their residents in motels and hotels so that they can practice self-isolation and social distancing. And I'm pleased that we were able to accelerate that funding to provide services to the Out of the Cold program. We're also monitoring what's happening federally and provincially. Some of our staff who are working off-site are looking at what's happening at the intergovernmental level so that we can feed that information into the town's deliberation. There are once or twice a week phone call between us and the hospital. We're also in constant contact with our county CEOs across the organization to try and make sure that we stay connected and that we are sharing best practices. The next slide, I further articulate what are the things that we have done to protect our staff. Obviously, many of our staff are working remotely, where we don't require a physical presence. Our public works, water and wastewater folks are working on a rotational basis. This is something I mentioned to members of council the last time we met, and this is to ensure that we're not putting staff unnecessarily at risk, and we have staff who are available for redeployment should, God forbid, something were to happen to one crew. So we've implemented these best practices to ensure that we continue to deliver clean water to our residents. And I want to acknowledge the work that Director Salama and her team have been doing in this regard. It's exemplary to see the kind of frontline collaboration and support. And this morning I hosted a virtual town hall with all of our staff. We had about 120 odd staff participating in a call-in meeting, and every single one of those individuals who were on the phone volunteered their services to provide assistance and support if it's required elsewhere. Again, this is just another demonstration of the kind of commitment you've got across this public service, which indeed it is a privilege to work with. We've also put extra cleaning and disinfecting in place for facilities and equipment. And I want to thank the fleet and facility staff for the work that they're doing. On the building side, we continue to do some amount of building inspection. The Chief Building Officer has put in place what I would call a cutting-edge safe work protocol, which is being templated across the region to protect our staff when they do some of these site inspections. We're doing some amount of home inspections by appointment, but we're also trying to ensure that we administer a short screening process before we enter homes. And if it is deemed to be at risk, we're encouraging our staff to try and find other means of dealing with non-emergency situation. And of course, we are continuing to advance electronic customer service upgrades to continue to deliver the work that we're obligated to deliver. We're looking at, on the next slide, looking at how we can set up proactive communications with our business community and with our residents. I did indicate earlier that we have set up a portal on our Engage Collingwood for people to provide us with feedback. So that site is up and running, and we look forward to hearing from our residents and our business community. We're doing daily updates to council. And we're making ourselves available to interact with the media if there are questions. I mentioned the ongoing liaison that we're doing with the county and with the hospital. And I've also talked about the interactive forum we had with our business leaders, the Q&A we have for the public, the ongoing video and online forum that we're trying to facilitate between the leadership and the staff, and also the consolidated information portal that's up on our website. The next slide, I highlighted here what we're doing on the transit side. We have implemented a Sunday schedule for obvious reasons, and we're also encouraging entry through the rear door. This is a best practice that is put in place across Ontario for most transit operators. And we're continuing to monitor ridership. Ridership is has been significantly reduced, and that's not necessarily a bad thing in this situation that we find ourselves in. And that we're doing some extra sanitation and cleaning at our facilities, and we're not accepting cash payments. Again, these are all best practices that is being put in place across Ontario. On bylaw enforcement, we're waiving all parking fees except for a situation where individuals may violate significant public health and safety concerns. We're not actively enforcing bylaws. We're waiving sign permit fees, and we're looking at how we can provide staff with the discretion to enforce bylaw. And in this regard, I want to encourage members of council to provide some feedback to us on where some of this discretion can be exercised. We would discourage individuals from making decisions regarding the waiving of some of these enforcement mechanisms by deferring to staff. We will be as accommodating as we can, and one issue that was brought to our attention recently was a request from one of our residents to park their RV in their driveway because one member of that family needed to be self-isolated, and we thought that was a reasonable request, and we'll continue to do things like that to ensure that we're accommodating and that we are helpful in encouraging our residents to practice what our health experts are telling us to do. The next slide, Parks and Rec, and I know a number of councillors have provided some really good comments back to me and to Director Culver on this issue. Our playgrounds, dog parks and skate parks have all been closed. And this morning I had a lengthy discussion with Director Culver about what else we can do to deter residents and children in particular from using the playgrounds, because we're seeing some unfortunate situation where parents and children may not be adhering to best practices in the use of these playgrounds, and to discourage that, we're looking at other ways that we might put in place to deter the use of these facilities without practicing appropriate public health guidelines. We're also looking at whether we could work with the local police on some other enforcement options, and this has to do with the declaration of provincial emergency by the province, and additional signage on our trails and open space to encourage our residents to practice social distancing. And the last point on that slide is, it's unfortunate, but we have decided to defer the hiring of seasonal staff for now, for a number of reasons, and in the Q&A I can get into what the rationale for that was. The next slide deals with some further initiatives on the parks, recreation and culture side. This is unfortunate, but some of our interactions with the province, for obvious reasons, is being delayed because of many of the provincial staff are also working from home, and they also have other priorities that might displace some of the things that we are interested in. And a case in point is our remediation plan for Sunset Point. We're also looking at a closure of the recreational facility until April, and all of these timelines potentially could be revisited as we know more about what we're faced with. And our PRC staff is also looking at how they might be able to do some virtual modeling to support active living and to also facilitate social connection. And we're expecting that some of that will be rolled out shortly. The other slide, this is something that I've heard a lot from members of council. Councillor Comey and others have been very keen on encouraging us to do whatever we can to support those who are vulnerable. And, we have put in place a mechanism to facilitate coordination amongst our social service delivery agents in Collingwood. And I know that Director Culver and Jennifer Parker and other members across the organization, include some of our staff in the clerk services area, have been trying to look at ways of connecting people, connecting volunteers, the coordination of supplies, and they're trying to do this through web and mobile application so that we've got a common document that people can share and they can look to each other for support. If, for example, certain inventory is short in one agency, we can look to another agency for supply. So the sharing of information, connecting volunteers with the vulnerable, all through a virtual portal, are things that we are encouraging and facilitating. The next slide, I think here again, this is an example of the businesses in Collingwood rising to the occasion, and we've got two local distilleries, Heretic and Canadian Mist, who've actually retooled their operations to now make hand sanitizer. And I want to say thank you to those two businesses and for retooling and for stepping up to the plate and doing what it takes to help this community in times of crisis. I know Councillor Jeffrey had raised this issue with me, and this is one issue that is in quite short supply. We have two local manufacturers stepping up to the plate. I'm also pleased to let you know that the town has placed its first order with Heretic, and we're expecting to get that supply in the next day or so. And I've encouraged staff to make that supply available to anyone else in the healthcare sector who might need it more than we do. So if there's someone out there who needs that supply and can't get access to it, we will share whatever supply we receive from Heretic in the next day or so to ensure that those who need it has access to it. And I also want to mention that, like I said, Canadian Mist is also doing what it takes to switch from what they're doing now to manufacturing hand sanitizer. The library services on slide 14, the library, of course, remains closed to the public. It goes without saying that we're not charging any overdue fines. And the one thing that Ken has done, the CEO, is to make some free books available outside the library. So residents who are at home and who might be looking for things to do for themselves or their children can not only have access to books outside the library, but there are some online courses and activities hosted by our staff in the library to help them get through the day. This is something that Councillor Comey and Councillor Jeffrey spoke about, all of the children at home. This is a way of keeping them busy. My only advice is if you're going to pick up a book, practice social distancing. On the town's procurement, on the next slide, we're looking at how we might be able to do some more local procurement. Of course, we want to be respectful of the Discriminatory Business Act, and we want to make sure that we respect whatever practices that we have in place regarding procurement. But one of the things we discussed is as we try to ramp up and get out of this economic slump, this might be an opportunity for us to look at whether or not we can enhance local content in what we use and what we buy across the municipality. Now I get into, on subsequent slides, what are some of the potential financial relief measures we're recommending to council. There's a lot more details in the staff report, so what I've done here is try and capture the essence of the options we looked at and then put forward some recommendations. I will initially deal with some of the immediate measures that we're trying to put in place. And if I were to describe this in one sentence or two, it would be, this is an attempt by the municipality to provide a down payment to our residents and our business and to take away one less thing for them to worry about. So the message, if council approves this package, will be to our residents and businesses, if you owe any money to town hall, you don't have to worry about any of that for the next 90 days. So that's the premise, and that's the foundation upon which we built these recommendations, at least the immediate interim recommendations that we're bringing forward for council consideration. On the property tax side, we looked at a variety of options, and we've turned it any way we could. We've looked at all kinds of waiving options. We've looked at the full continuum of tax deferral, with tax forgiveness, and where we ended up is, at least initially, we're recommending that we defer tax payment for 90 days, and that we waive all interest and all penalties during this period. This will cost us about $40,000 a month. For individuals who would have submitted pre-authorized checks and have pre-authorized payments, we are encouraging them to call in and let us know if they don't want us to put that monthly check or monthly payment through. So this also gives us a flexibility, and I want to be clear here. It gives our residents and business a flexibility to pay if you would like to pay. All of us are affected differently. So if you would like to continue with your tax payment, we're giving you that option to do so. But we're also saying to you that if you need a bit of relief for the next 3 months, let us know, and we will not process your pre-authorized checks or your pre-authorized payments if that's what you want. If you're not on a pre-authorized plan and you don't make a payment, you will not be charged any penalty or any fees when you decide to make the payment within the next 90 days. So for example, the installments that are due on May the 15th will be deferred until August the 15th. This is the initial recommendation that we're looking at on the tax side. On the wastewater side, again, we looked at a variety of options. Many of those options are articulated in the staff report. We looked at the waiving. We looked at only charging the fixed costs for both commercial and industrial and for residential. But where we ended up was to again decide that we were going to defer any payment for 90 days. So consistent with the property tax recommendation, we're suggesting that residents don't necessarily have to make a payment for water, wastewater for 90 days. Again, if residents or businesses are interested in making payments, they can still do so, but they're not required to do so. And if they make the payment within 90 days, then they will not be charged any penalty or any interest. On the business support services, we heard a lot of really good comments from the business community yesterday, not all of which we had the time to review and digest, but we're looking at all those options now, and we'll have a further report that will come back to council to deal with some of those recommendations. One of the things that we heard loud and clear, I mentioned earlier, was the need for credible information, and that information has to come from the municipality. One of the concerns mentioned as well was the business community concern that they didn't know what was in the federal government package and they need help. So what I've done, I've already made arrangements to have a consultant do a virtual teleconference sometime next week to unpack the federal COVID-19 $82 billion package with our business community. So they'll walk through all of the provisions in the federal legislation. They will also look at what Ontario announces today, and they will do a full walkthrough virtually with our business community. We're going to pay the cost for hosting that meeting, which should be minimal, but I thought at least that's an action we can take immediately to provide support to the business community. We're also looking at how we might be able to provide coaching and other types of services. And one of the things that was heartbreaking to hear on that teleconference yesterday was, the amount of layoffs that have already happened in this community. And, we're looking at business retention, but, these businesses need help, and they need help now. And I think although we don't have all the levers as a municipality, we have the ability to bring some of these concerns to the federal and provincial governments. And later on in the recommendation, you will see some resolutions in that regard. And I know Councillor Jeffrey has been very active in making some of those considerations known at the FCM level, because many of these comments are shared not only by us, but by other communities across Ontario. So we will look at how we can provide continuous support to our business community. You will look at our staff report, and one of the things we also sort of look at is, is there an opportunity for us to look at waiving BIA fees or paying the BIA fees on their behalf? Is there an opportunity for us to look at wage subsidy that would top up the provincial 10% wage subsidy? Can we look at subsidies along for rent? And these are all very, very expensive propositions, many of which we cannot afford, but that shouldn't deter us from making sure that we bring some of those discussions and some of those options to the table. So I want the business community to know that in times of need, we've got your backs, we're looking out for you, and we'll do everything within our power to make sure that some of the considerations that you've brought to the fore will be elevated to the county, the provincial, and the municipal government. And the final point on that slide is that we're also maintaining our planning application process. The one thing that I've talked a lot about to staff, and I've reflected on it to the mayor as well, is that I don't want us to be able to not have shovel-ready project at the end of this, because I think we've got to be able to, as soon as this is over, show some confidence in the economy by getting some projects expedited and some projects ready. So we're still continuing with all our procurement work. We're still continuing the process of development applications, and we're trying to make sure that some of these things are ready so that when we get over this, we can lead the way by getting some of these public service projects in the ground and up and running fairly quickly. And one of the things, for example, by way of the discussion we've been having with staff is, we've got a lot of projects associated with our Main Street, our downtown revitalization, and we've talked a lot about getting the project manager or redeploying the project manager from one of our existing staff and getting that project ready so that we can roll it out as soon as we're over the pandemic. I'll skip the next slide because I think we went through that. Just on emergency management, and I have the chief here, and I want to also thank the chief for the work he's been doing. Him and I have been on the phone 2 or 3 times a day as we try to navigate all of the nuances around what's happening regionally and provincially. And I also want to thank Councillor Hamlin for the work that she's been doing in this regard, because the advice we've been getting and the monitoring and the review that she has done of related statutes and our own bylaw and our own manual has been instructive in helping us to take a look at some of these things. So we're going to make some changes to reflect what's happening within the one organization, but also what's happening provincially. And, we're recommending here that if council sees fit to delegate some of this authority to the fire chief to make some of the minor amendments or minor changes to reflect efficient management during emergency. The next slide, this is delegation of authority to the CAO, and this delegation, in my view, is fairly routine, and this is to give the CAO the authority to be able to make changes that are operational in nature, and I've listed 3 or 4 examples there. So if we decide at some point in time that we're going to facilitate free transit, or if we need to reallocate resources in response to response to what's happening with the pandemic and others, then the CEO can do it. There are some caveats. One is that this delegated authority, if they're acted on, would have to be communicated to council before those decisions are made. I would just add that this, in my view, would not include some of the organizational authority that the CEO has to make decisions regarding the reallocation of resources across the organization. This would go beyond that, and if that authority were to be exercised, it would have to be done by letting council know it is being exercised. So that is there for your consideration as well. I also thought I should give you a bit of a tour around the region and what's happening on the declaration of emergency. And a number of our colleagues across the county has declared emergencies, many of you know the county has as well. The major reasons why municipalities traditionally declare states of emergency was to access provincial funding. Because in most cases, municipalities who have suffered from some kind of a natural disaster, that disaster may be unique to them. You know, I'm thinking about the ice storm or significant flooding, for example. It's not province-wide, so it's different from what we're experiencing now. So the declaration of emergency within the context of what we're experiencing today, that incentive to access funding may not necessarily be there. The big difference here, and we've seen this in Toronto, is a declaration of emergency would allow the mayor to exercise authority on behalf of council. So the mayor will still be required to stay within the statutes that govern municipal council, but he would be able to make decisions without having to come to council. Would be one of the benefits of the declaration of emergency. I also want to add to that since this COVID-19 outbreak has occurred, and since we've had our council meeting the last time where we put forward our business continuity plans, we have been in a heightened state of alertness, and we're ready to activate our emergency operations center at the moment's notice. Again, the caveat is because this is something different from what we've seen in the past, is that even if we activate our EOC, we still have to practice social distancing, and we still all can't congregate in the same area. So the intention of that slide was to let council know that this is still something that we are monitoring and looking at on an ongoing basis, and hopefully, we'll get into a bit of a conversation whether or not this is something that is deemed desirable at this stage. On the next slide, this is what I've been talking about, and this is one that I feel very, very strongly about, because I think this is the future, and I think this is what we have to do now, which is to try and prepare for economic recovery. So I've, for lack of a better word, we're calling this the Economic Support and Recovery Task Force. And we've developed some terms of reference and a mandate for this, which we can discuss if there is interest in doing it. And this was, I think, when this was shared with the business community yesterday, it was met with an overwhelming positivity. And the recommendation here is that this would be a task force that is chaired by a mayor. My recommendation was that it would be co-chaired by the mayor and a member of the business community. And it would also include at a minimum the chair of the Development and Operations Standing Committee, because some of the economic development implications that committee has oversight for. And that this committee will report to SIC. And the primary motivation here is to create a committee to start to think about how we manage support for the community during this crisis, and how do we prepare for recovery post-COVID-19. So we're not alone in thinking through this. We're developing some partnership that hopefully would have wider support and wider buy-in. And, you know, I spoke a bit about the whole public service preparedness piece that we're doing by way of our procurement and some of the projects that we have in the pipeline, and all that sort of stuff can feed into this task force. So we have a coordinated way of bringing these things to council's attention. The next slide, which for some reason doesn't have a number, is probably because it's a finance slide, so there are no numbers attached to it, which is ironic. But the request here is that we set aside $2.5 million of the funds from the College sale and the airport. We've got about $18 million, I think, in that fund. We're requesting we set aside $2.5 million and place them in a contingency fund to help us deal with this. If there are funds that are not used, we can return it back to the Treasury. But this fund is needed, and then support is needed now. And I think one of the comments we heard as well from the business community was that if we are going to make a difference, we have to act and act quickly. So we've got a bunch of recommendations before you that I think we can implement right away. And there are a bunch of recommendations that would require further fiscal analysis that we can do fairly quickly. And if we've got some amount of fiscal limit, then we could govern ourselves accordingly. Again, I want to emphasize that whatever money we spent will be accountable, will be transparent, and hopefully will be impactful. Because we cannot just put money in the system if it's not getting to the right people and it's not getting to the right way of making sure that we're providing what's needed in the community. On slide 25 is simply reiterating what I said earlier, is that a lot of our business leaders have asked us to lobby the feds and Ontario to provide support for them to access the various funds and make it a bit more transparent and a bit more seamless. We'll continue to look at how we can do that, how we can bring some of their ideas, some of their concerns to the federal and provincial government. I've attempted to summarize what are the financial exposure as a result of the immediate recommendations before you. I just wanted to note that the judicial inquiry cost is now at $6.4 million. That has had a significant impact, of course, on our reserves, which we need to replenish. I've also put some indication of what the immediate impact of the immediate responses are. So if you look at the waiving of penalty and charges and property taxes, if you look at the waiving of interest in water and wastewater, and you look at the lost parking revenue, we're looking at roughly $250,000. But that sort of incrementally goes up if you add the PRC revenue lost, the transit by law enforcement. It quickly ratchets it up to close to $350,000. So I'm going to stop there, and I apologize again for the lengthy presentation, but I thought it was important for me to articulate what we are doing, what we have done, what we are doing, and what we plan on doing with council's endorsement. I once again want to thank all of the department heads and all of the men and women across the public service in Collingwood for the work that they have done and continue to do. And I also want to pay tribute to members of council for their leadership. Before I conclude, I just want to raise one issue which was brought to my attention by Councillor Comey just before the meeting, and that had to do with some of the money that PRC would have provided to some of our partners, and whether or not we can loosen the conditions attached to some of this money. I think given the circumstances we're faced with, and given that we're talking about $1,500 for most of the recipients and $5,000 for 5 of the other recipients, we could potentially look at relaxing the conditions attached to that money to ensure that some of these organizations have the flexibility to deal with their individual circumstances as a result of COVID-19. So once again, Your Worship, Deputy Mayor, members of Council, I want to thank you for your support and for your leadership, and I hope that we can deliver the services that you're looking for. I want to thank department heads for the work that they've been doing, and I want to thank all of our staff on the front line who day in and day out demonstrate the kind of enthusiasm and commitment that is second to none. Thank you very much.
Thank you, CAO, for that comprehensive report. There was a lot of ground covered in that report, and I think for ease of dealing with it, what I propose to do is just break these recommendations out into their respective parts so that we can deal with them individually. I'm going to start first with the motion that we received the report, and we can have some discussion under that, and then we'll get into the individual recommendations. So it's moved by Deputy Mayor Hall and seconded by Councillor MacLeod. Be it resolved that staff report CAO 2020-02 COVID-19 economic and other relief measures be received. And with that going on the floor, are there general questions or comments that Council would like to make before we get into the individual components? Seeing none, I will call the vote, and I will start this time with Councillor Madigan.
In favor.
Councillor Comey.
In favor.
Councillor MacLeod.
In favor.
Deputy Mayor Hall.
In favor.
I am in favor. Councillor Hamlin. Councillor Hamlin, are you in favor of receiving the report?
In favor, sorry.
Thank you. Councillor Jeffrey.
In favor.
Councillor Berman.
In favor.
And Councillor Doherty.
In favor.
Thank you. So that's passed unanimously. So the first set of recommendations, I will read them out and we can get them on the floor for discussion. So it's moved by Deputy Mayor Hall, seconded by Councillor MacLeod. Be it resolved that Council authorizes staff to, number one, waive penalty and interest charges for the month of March, April, and May 2020 for property taxes. Two, defer the pre-authorized payment plan for the months of April, May, and June 2020. Is that for tax relief or property taxes? And number three is implement the recommended relief for water and wastewater users. And perhaps for discussion purposes, I'll break those three out into separate resolutions as well. So first, we'll be dealing with waiving the penalty and interest charges on property taxes for the months of March, April, and May 2020. Questions or comments, Council? Seeing none, then I will call the vote. All in favor? Oh, can't do that. Sorry. Old habits. So I'm now going to start with Councillor Comey.
In favor.
Are you in favor of waiving the penalty and interest charges for property taxes for the months of March, April, May 2020?
Yes.
Thank you. Councillor MacLeod?
In favor.
Deputy Mayor?
In favor.
I am in favor. Councillor Hamlin?
In favor.
Councillor Jeffrey?
In favor.
Councillor Berman?
In favor.
Councillor Doherty?
In favor.
And Councillor Madigan.
In favor.
That first recommendation is passed unanimously. The second recommendation is to defer the pre-authorized payment plan for property taxes for the months of April, May, and June 2020. Questions or comments, Council? Councillor Jeffrey.
Thank you, Mayor Saunderson. Just to add to that, the CAO's comment that would require you expressing that you wish to defer individually.
For the pre-authorized payments, those individuals would have to instruct us not to cash them.
Okay,
And they have the option to continue if they wish to.
okay.
So it's entirely up to the taxpayer to make that election.
So would it be a friendly amendment just to expand that, to make that concise?
I think that would be helpful, and I'll look to the clerk.
I'm just, through your worship to members of council, I'm wondering if we include in that motion that council authorized with residents that wish to have their property tax, pre-authorized payments deferred, that we have to make the onus on them
Yes,
to contact us. Okay, so I'll make that wording.
thank you. Is that
Yes,
sufficient?
thank
Good.
you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Jeffrey. While the clerk's doing that, are there any other questions or comments? Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. Through you to the appropriate staff. Just for maybe members of the public at home, in terms of just from a functional standpoint, if you're making pre-authorized payments through a third party, say a financial institution, how would this work? And who would they be reaching out to, the town or the financial institution?
I don't know, CAO or?
So through your worship, if they're making payments through a financial institution, then we wouldn't have those records, so they'd have to go and approach this financial institution to make that stop payment. If they are, if they've given us, for example, pre-authorized checks, then they'll have to phone us. This is in response to Councillor Jeffrey's motion, to let us know that they would like those checks not to be processed or cashed, and we will respect that request. But if it's done through a third party, they'll have to advise a third party of their request not to put those checks through. And again, a reminder is that if those checks don't go through and they were to pay later on, they will not be charged any interest or any penalty.
Any follow-up, Deputy Mayor?
If I may, Your Worship, it's Marjorie. The vast majority of third-party payments come through the banks, and they're included in the taxpayer's mortgage payment. With the 6-month deferral potential for the mortgage payments, that would defer the tax payments as well, I would think.
And I guess just to clarify, Marjorie, that's something that the individual would have to, an arrangement they'd have to make with their bank and their financial institution.
Correct. Yes.
Okay. I've got you, Councillor McLeod, but I just want to check with the Deputy Mayor. Is there any follow-up to that?
No, I appreciate the clarification from the treasurer. It'd be interesting to know, and I don't expect an answer right now, if I was aware that the financial institutions were giving 6 months. There doesn't seem to be some consistency. I've heard reports from various sources that certain banks seem to be a little bit more proactive versus others. And I'll be interested to see if, like, we're giving a 3-month deferral here, if they're going to offer 6 months, how does that flow through? How are they going to, should we be prepared? I guess what I'm trying to say is, should we as a municipality be prepared that we in fact may not receive payment from the banks for 6 months?
That's a good question, and I guess we'll have to look into that while that is implemented. And I guess just as a notice to our residents, in talking with our local MP, Terry Dowdle, the federal government has made significant funds available to the banks for this very reason. And so if anyone is having an issue with their bank or financial institution and getting this relief, he has asked that they reach out to us, and we keep the federal government advised, because it was a quid pro quo for those payments, and there was an agreement made with the institution, so they want to make sure they honor that. Councillor McLeod.
Thank you, Your Worship. My question is probably for the treasurer. So if we are, as I understand it, asking our residents who wish to continue paying their property taxes to contact the town. And I believe we have 9,000 residences or 9,000 properties or somewhere around there. Do we have capacity to answer that many calls if everybody decides to pay their taxes or if everybody decides to opt out?
Right, I guess, just as
Through
a
you,
matter
your
of clar-
worship.
I guess you're just making a clarification. So the way that the motion has been phrased, Councillor McLeod, is we are waiving them, and if somebody with a pre-authorized plan wishes to opt out, then they have to contact us. For any other taxpayer that doesn't have a pre-authorized plan, they simply don't pay. And we're waiving any fees or penalties for that 3-month period. If somebody who has a pre-authorized plan wants to opt out for that 3-month period, they need to notify us, and then I'll pass that over to the treasurer.
Again, through you, your worship, we actually have about 12,000 properties, and it's not just only residential properties that are on pre-authorized payment plans. We have some rather large commercial properties as well. And total of all the pre-authorized are roughly 3,000, which we believe we can field. There'll be a number that will want to drop out and a number that won't. And we've already got, we were looking at redeploying or getting assistance from other departments. So we actually got an email today saying that we have a staff member in PRC that used to be the tax collector at Town of Blue Mountains, quite familiar with our general ledger system. So we will have help to remove those people that would like to be removed from the pre-authorized.
So as a follow-up, thank you, Treasurer Leonard, through you, Mr. Mayor, just so that I'm absolutely clear. If I'm one of the people who is on the pre-authorized, every month a certain number of dollars comes out of my bank account, and I prefer to continue to pay, I do what?
Nothing.
Thank you.
So sorry,
CAO.
Your Worship, I just want to clarify, yeah. So if you're on a pre-authorized plan and you do nothing, your payment will go through. If you decide that you want to opt out, you can call us and we'll facilitate that. The other point that's really important as well, and I think Marjorie addresses this, is that we're looking at a skills inventory, and even this morning we're talking about the redeployment of staff to those areas that might experience more volume of calls as a result of the decision by council this evening. So we're ready to redeploy those resources to ensure that if someone were to call in, they'll get someone to respond to their phone call, if not live, shortly thereafter, and or by email. So if you're on a pre-authorized plan, you do nothing, your payment will go through. If you call us and say, I don't want to put this payment through, then we'll take it out. If you're not on a pre-authorized plan and you want to pay your tax, you can pay your tax. If you decide not to pay your tax, nothing happens for 90 days.
Thank you very much.
Council, any questions, further questions or comments before we call the vote on the second item? So the second item then is to defer
Mayor.
the pre-authorized, sorry, yes? Councillor Comey.
Sorry, it's Councillor Hanlon who has a question.
Councillor Hamlin. I think Councillor Hamlin's frozen.
Can you hear me?
Yes, yep.
Okay, sorry, thank you. My question through you, Mr. Mayor, to staff is the 6-month deferral on mortgage payments that the federal government has asked the banks to implement. Is that a request of the mortgage providers, or have they actually put a law in place for that? Do we know?
I'll put it through the CAO. I don't know that they've implemented a legislation.
Yes, thank you. No, I don't. It's not legislation. There is. I think there is $50-odd million as part of their $82 million package, which hopefully will provide some liquidity to help manage some of this. But I don't think it's legislative.
And I
Thank
think it
you,
may just be connected to CMHC insured mortgages too.
because it just struck me that the details around this is where we would find if the deferral would also apply to property tax. Because I would think the federal government wouldn't touch that. They wouldn't touch a municipality's source of revenue. But I thought if there were some details around that, or if we know they were coming out, that would be helpful for us. Or if we could, through our CAO, make a representation to the federal government that this is something they should be considering.
Now, you raise a good point, and these things are very fluid, and I guess the legislation was just passed yesterday, so how it gets implemented and how it rolls out is obviously going to impact us, so we'll have to keep track of that. And I would imagine that might be one of the things that we would be posting information on for our residents as well.
Thank
So,
you.
yes, that's a good point. Yes?
No further questions. I can provide it. I've made the resolution a little bit more full, based on our conversation. I've made it a little bit more clear to residents of what's being asked. So if this sounds appropriate, that residents shall have the option to request a deferral of the property tax pre-authorized payment plan for the months of April, May, and June for those property taxpayers that provide pre-authorized payments directly to the town. And further, that property taxpayers that provide payments through a third-party institution must contact their respective institution to determine relief options they may have available.
Thank you. I think that covers it. Are there any other questions or comments in before I call the vote on this item? Councillor Doherty.
Thank you, Your Worship. Only to say I'm very supportive of this recommendation. And I'm also very pleased to see that staff have considered the notion that we may have to go a little farther, in particular with our small businesses, and look at other more aggressive measures to free up cash flow for small businesses, including some sort of rebate or forgiveness of property taxes for some period of time. I'm very supportive of these initial recommendations.
Thank you. Any other comments? Seeing none, I will call the vote, and I believe I'm starting with you, Councillor McLeod.
In favor.
Deputy Mayor.
In favor?
I am in favor. Councillor Hamlin.
In favor?
Councillor Jeffrey.
In favor?
Councillor Berman.
In favor.
Councillor Doherty.
In favor?
Councillor Madigan.
In favor.
And Councillor Comey.
In favor.
Thank you. So that too is carried unanimously as revised. So the final recommendation of these three are to implement the recommended relief for water and wastewater users, which is a similar package, which is to waive fees, penalties, and interest for the next 90 days. Are there questions or comments, Council, before I call the vote on this one? I've got Councillor McLeod, and I also see Councillor Jeffrey. Councillor McLeod, Councillor Doherty, I've got you too.
Thank you, Your Worship. You mentioned that it's similar. So is this again, the homeowner, the user of the water, the user of the electricity must contact the town in order to opt out of paying?
If they have a pre-authorized plan in place. Otherwise, they don't need to contact us. And I'll look to the CAO to confirm that. So if the user has a pre-authorized payment in place, then they need to contact us to opt out. If they don't have a payment plan in place, then they can simply not pay, or they can pay. It's again at the option of the individual.
Just, sorry, Your Worship, I just want to make one clarification, and we're working through this with EPCOR, because as many of you know, this is a consolidated bill. So we're working through the mechanics of EPCOR. So the exact details of the implementation of this is being sorted through. So there might be some nuances that may not be as we articulated today. But the intent of this is to allow people to have a 90-day reprieve from their water and wastewater bill. But the exact mechanics of this would have to be worked out with the EPCOR.
Okay. Did you hear that, Councillor McLeod?
I did, thank you.
Councillor Jeffrey?
Thank you, Mayor Saunderson. So in a similar vein, I have received contact from people who don't wish to automatically have their bills deferred. They want the option because some of them want to continue paying. It's within their budget and they want to continue. And I think it would be attractive in terms of the cash flow for our operations to maintain as much of that as we can.
And I guess to the CAO's point, the bills are still going to go out, I think, and the election is whether or not you want to pay. And the wrinkle is that if you have a pre-authorized plan and you don't want to pay, you need to contact EPCOR and the town, and we're trying to work through that, so the actual nuts and bolts. Councillor Doherty?
Thank you. Actually, the CAO did clarify my question. I was interested in what arrangements had been made with EPCOR, seeing as we share the billing with them. I'm satisfied.
Okay. Anyone else before I call the roll? So we're now starting with you, Deputy Mayor.
In favor?
I am in favor. Councillor Hamlin?
Sorry, I keep forgetting to unmute me. Yes, in favor.
Thank you. Councillor Jeffrey?
In favor.
Councillor Berman?
In favor.
Councillor Doherty?
In favor.
Councillor Madigan?
In favor.
Councillor Comey?
In favor.
And Councillor McLeod?
In favor.
So that is carried unanimously as well. And so the next item on the list is moved by Deputy Mayor Hall and seconded by Councillor McLeod. It reads, be it resolved, the council authorized the establishment of the Economic Support and Recovery Task Force. Question or comments, council? Councillor Madigan.
Thank you very much. I believe the business people have spoken and asked us to act quickly, when in fact this won't be a quick fix. And I think no matter what, recovery is going to be tough on us all. But this Economic Support and Recovery Task Force is a strong, reassuring, and comforting message to our business community. And I think together, if we stick together in a positive manner and show that we're all in this together, we'll pull through it together. So I applaud Breed and staff. Thank you.
And Councillor Jeffrey?
Thank you, Mayor Saunderson, and I too am very supportive of this. My very first teleconference with FCM members from across Canada was that messaging into recovery needed to happen yesterday. And there's a lot of expertise out there to help us with that.
Yes, I'm hopeful. Oh, sorry. Are there any other council members that would like to speak? Councillor McLeod, and I have you, Councillor Hamlin.
Thank you.
Councillor McLeod, go ahead.
I am in favor of something along these lines. I'm curious, though, to know more about the context or the demeanor, the makeup of this group. And I think that perhaps there ought to be more than 2 members of council on it. I'm not sure how much control we have other than saying yes to this. Can we say we want more, how many people on it in terms of reference and so on?
Yeah, we're open for discussion, so go ahead.
So I would suggest that it be 3 members of council. I have no suggestions on who those ought to be or ought not to be. But I think it should be 3 members of council, not 2. And that's one of the things I have to say about it, and that's actually pretty much all I have to say about it.
Okay.
Open to hearing from other council members on this topic.
Sure. Well, I think more representation, I think is a good thing. I was going to be asking that we include Councillor Jeffrey, given her role in with the FCM and her discussions that she's been having with the federal government. I think a big piece of this group is going to be advocacy moving forward and trying to leverage the dollars or get clarity from these upper levels of government when they talk about 82 billion, 27 billion in cash, 55 billion in deferrals. What does that really mean when it trickles down to our residents, and does any of that help to us at the municipal level to backfill? We're going to hear from the province this afternoon, but they've talked in the hundreds of millions as well, but we really don't know what this is going to look like on the ground. So I think while health and safety of our residents is the immediate priority, our residents, and we've been hearing from a number of businesses, and I've been sharing those emails with council, the effects on our local businesses and our local residents in terms of job losses is massive. And so when we get through, as the CAO said, when we get through the peak of the bubble here and we try to get back to some state of normalcy, we want to make sure there are jobs to get back to. And so working with our business leaders and the composition, I'll ask the CAO to talk a bit about the business leaders composition, how that would look. But I think on the terms of reference, this is something we can flesh out as we move forward, but immediately we're trying to mobilize and get active and start these discussions. And with that said, I'll go to the CAO.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship, and I've lost my connection, so I'm trying to reconnect. I think I don't have any concerns with having more members of council than proposed. This was an attempt to get the committee going. So to add another member of council, I think there was lots of value in doing that. I thought it would be instructive or helpful to have a member of the business community co-chair this. And, we can decide as a council how we want to orchestrate and approve that individual and how we want to, put a call out for nominees or adopt whatever method we deem to be appropriate. And in terms of populating the committee, I think it would make sense to try and get representatives from the different business sectors in Collingwood. So we have as broad a representation as possible, keeping in mind that maybe a maximum number should be around 9 or so for the committee. And if council approved this, then we could come back with some terms of reference, or we could circulate terms of reference for the committee in the next day or so for council's consideration and feedback.
Councillor MacLeod?
Thank you.
I've got
And so do we see this group as a money spending group or an advocacy group to upper levels of government, which are spending money? I'm sorry to say that I don't completely understand what the plan would be, nuts and bolts wise.
Through you, Your Worship, I think this is, I don't see this as a spending committee. I see this as a committee that will make recommendations to SIC and to council on how to rejuvenate and get the business sector going again, and bring some additional expertise and advice to the table that we may not have access to. So, this is not a committee that will have a budget, for example. They will deliberate amongst themselves. They will talk to the business community. They will look at what's happening across Ontario, and also bring some additional money to bear on conversation. One of the things that we discussed at the call yesterday was the potential for the business community to put some amount of money in a consolidated fund with the town to get things going again. So I can see this committee also going out there and doing some fundraising and some advocacy to try and bring some additional fiscal clout to the table, as it were. But this is not a decision-making body. This is an ideas committee populated by people with experience in this area. And this committee will come back to SIC and council with recommendations, and the ultimate decision will be with council.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Hamlin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to our staff, I'm wondering if the composition of the committee could include a broad range of our business community. And by that, I mean, for example, someone from manufacturing, someone from the small business sector, someone from the education sector, someone from the construction industry, someone from arts and culture. They have a lot of participants in our local economy. so that we are putting our tentacles as far out into our community as we can while we put this committee together. I'm very much in favor of this committee, and that's all I wanted to say.
Thank you, Councillor Emlin. I think we're in full agreement that we want to get as much diversity in the, to represent our various business interests. CAO, do you have anything to add to that?
No, Your Worship, just, you know, that was the intent, is to have broad representation from across the business sectors, and to try and have people who can speak to the nuances of those individual business communities, so.
Thank you.
Councillor Berman, and then Councillor Comey, I see you.
So, I don't have any issue with this, I just want a few clarifications. Some have been done already, that there'll be a terms of reference that will come back to us, I would assume. And that there will be no, that the group won't have the ability to make any financial decisions that don't come back to us, I see. I'm looking at the article on the Mayor's Advisory Team, I'm assuming there's a lot out of that you said worked really well, that probably led to an idea similar to this. You spoke very well, very highly of what came out of that. So my question is, if this committee reports back to SIC, it's a task force of SIC, they report to SIC, and SIC makes the decisions, what would be the downside, I guess, of making them a subcommittee or an ad hoc committee of SIC as opposed to this, what appears to be a totally separate entity?
Well, I'll put that through the,
question.
okay, I'll put that through the clerk then.
Certainly through your worship to Councillor Berman, it's specifically providing for in a procedural bylaw that standing committees can establish their own specific task force, and they are complete once their duties are complete. So that's why we took the frame and terminology of task force versus an advisory committee or another subcommittee of a committee. So it's only for a defined purpose, and then once that purpose ends, then they become no longer relevant.
Great, so further to that, sorry, through you, further to that, then, and at some point there'd be an end date to this, that's a moot point, and it also, I'm assuming, is why it eliminates the need, as to other advisory committees, for council to have to go through the approved nominees.
Correct.
Okay, that's great, thank you.
Okay. Councillor Comey, was it? Sorry, I've lost track of my 5 years.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Further to Councillor MacLeod's comments, I too support the idea of an additional member of council. The deputy mayor certainly crossed my mind as our current acting BIA representative. So I would like to put that out there for his consideration and the consideration of council to ensure that the BIA feels that they have some representation as well.
Okay, thank you. So I think the resolution we have before us, I think, is to move forward with this task force in terms of the nuts and bolts of what it's going to look like in composition. I think staff is going to flesh some of that out and come back to us with terms of reference. So I think we're in a position where we can call a vote unless there's other questions or comments, and then this will obviously be an evolving issue as we put together what this would look like for council's consideration. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor Saunderson. Just to follow up on Councillor Comey, if staff thought I could be of service, then I'd be more than happy to participate.
Thank you. All right. Seeing no, oh, Councillor Doherty.
Thank you. And just also following up on Councillor Comey's comments, I certainly can see the advantage of adding the deputy mayor based on his role as representative of the BIA. My only concern is that we should not attempt to overweight this committee with politicians. And if I were to myself personally want to prioritize who should be on. I feel that Councillor Jeffrey, with her connections with FCM, may be somewhat more advantageous if it's down to the numbers.
Okay, thank you for that. I mean, I think we'll leave some of that in staff's hands. I guess what I can say is that we have reached out to the BIA and the Chamber of Commerce in putting together some of the recommendations for today. I got very quick responses both from the BIA and the Chamber of Commerce, and those have been forwarded on to Councillor Jeffrey for her discussions with FCM. So I think we're doing everything we can to get accurate representation, and I'll leave it to staff to flesh that out as we move forward.
Your Worship, just one other point, if I may. The only consideration I put on the table as well is that we will circulate the terms of reference and the mandate, but I think we'll probably need some flexibility as well with the committee, so the committee can also have an opportunity to provide some input into the terms of reference. So what I would recommend is that we table some draft terms of reference, and maybe the committee at its first meeting can take a look at it and provide us with some feedback and comment. I don't want to put the committee in such a situation where they feel that they can't get the work done based on terms of reference that we would have put in place. Recognizing that this is not a committee that would spend money, for sure. I mean, that's not what I'm referring to, but they might need some flexibility in the margins to make sure that they can bring that economic clout to the table as it were.
Thank you. Any questions or comments arising out of that? Seeing none, I'm going to call the vote, and this time I start with me. So I'm in favor. Councillor Hamlin.
In favor?
Thank you. Councillor Jeffrey?
In favor?
Councillor Berman? Councillor Doherty?
In favor.
Councillor Madigan?
In favor.
Councillor Comey?
In favor.
Councillor McLeod?
In favor.
And Deputy Mayor?
In favor.
Thank you. So that is passed unanimously.
Sorry, excuse me, just for clarification.
Yes.
So it was recommended being established with the mayor and the chair of development and operations. Are we deciding today whether we want an additional member, number one, and number two, who that member's going to be?
I guess what I was thinking might happen in the discussion with, when staff looks into this, 4 or 3, is there a magic number there, or are we able to accommodate that? So I guess I was looking more for staff to give some input on that.
So through your worship, I mean, the notes I have is that what I heard coming from the floor was yourself, the deputy mayor, Councillor Jeffrey, and the chair of the NO. And if that's my sort of working assumption, if we think that, I did hear Councillor Doherty speak about maybe prioritizing to 3, but I didn't hear any comments in that regard. So my assumption is there are going to be 4 members, unless I hear otherwise.
So, Council, are there strong feelings, in my opinion, given the importance of this committee, and we want to get going as quickly as possible? I have no issues with 4 council members being involved. Is there anyone that feels strongly about that? Yeah. Councillor Madigan.
I think the key messaging is going to come from the business, and it doesn't. I don't think it matters whether there's 4, 5, 3 listeners on our end, because the messaging will come from the manufacturing, from the tourism district, from the small business, big business, home business. Let's not forget about them. But I think the messaging is going to come from them. They're going to tell us what they want. They're going to tell us what they need, and the committee is just going to sit there and listen to it. So I think Kathy is. Councillor Jeffrey is great to have on it from her perspective at the SCM level, and I think obviously you as mayor and the heads of either department. So like Alvin said, nobody could hear me. That's funny because my voice is quite loud. So I'll repeat that again. I think the messaging is going to come from the business sector, so I don't think it matters how many people sit on the committee. It's just the importance of their way to interpret those messages and that be able to take it back to council as a whole. I don't think that worrying about whether there's 4 or 5, 3 or 2 is gonna matter, to be honest. I think that people will tell us what they want and need. Thank you.
Point taken. Any other comments, council? So that being the case, I think we'll move forward with the 4 and leave it to staff to come back with terms of reference. The next item, moved by Deputy Mayor Hall and seconded by Councillor MacLeod, be it resolved that council authorize the establishment of a Collingwood Emergency Contingency Fund from the asset sale proceeds. These funds would be accessed only for the support of the community through the pandemic, and once the provincial state of emergency has ended, any remaining funds be returned to the sale proceeds fund. Comments or questions, council? Councillor Hamlin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Obviously, if we're going to enact some measures, we're going to need some funding. But I was wondering if this would be an appropriate time for us to consider, before we allocate funds from the asset sales pile, to have some initiative where we review our budget for 2020. I think that there may be some matters that are in the budget that we would choose not to proceed with, given where we are today. And we also may find ourselves with funds from senior levels of government. For example, although I heard our CAO suggest that perhaps it would be good for us to proceed right away with public service projects, we have, I know, 3 large PRC projects for this year. And one of which, if I understand correctly, which is the waterfront one, which we're all waiting for, we may already be past the date, given the timelines I believe I heard, for this to be completed this year. So there may be some funding, for example, in that project. So and the other thing that's on my mind is, although it is costing us funds because certain facilities are closed, I suspect if we were to look at our budgeting, we would find on a case-by-case basis that we are also, saving funds because buildings are not being used. So I wanted to suggest that before we go too far down the road of setting aside $2.5 million, that we take a good close look at our 2020 budget and see what might be available there. And also, as I say, if we can wait another week or 2 and see if and how much funding might be coming from our senior levels of government, maybe. So I guess what I'm suggesting is deferring this for 2 weeks.
To the CAO.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you to Councillor Hamlin. I mean, I think the idea of looking at our budget is a good suggestion, and we've actually, started looking at expenditure, but we haven't done the line-by-line review, which I think Councillor Hamlin is suggesting. The only consideration I put on the table is that a deferral for 2 weeks will not get us too far, because I would really, really be surprised if we get any clarity on upper level government funding in 2 weeks. And the third point is that what we're recommending here is not to go out and spend this money. This money will be there, but I think we would have access to some amount of funding that we could look to if we need to move quickly on it. So my strong recommendation to council is that we can do the review that Councillor Hamlin suggested. I think it will be the right thing to do given the situation we're faced with. And secondly, if council is so inclined, we can look at a lower amount if that would provide a greater comfort. But again, this is money being set aside, and if it's not used, it will return to the Treasury. But I don't think we'll get any clarity on federal or provincial funding in 2 weeks. 2 months may also be pushing it.
And maybe if I can just do a follow-up on that.
Point of order, Your Worship. I think Councillor Hamlin has called for a deferral, which does not get debated.
Right. Anyway, I just wanted to ask a point of clarification on that thought before I get to the deferral, and I haven't asked for a seconder. CAO, just by putting the money in the reserve, we're not committing to spending it, and in fact, any initiatives or measures would come back before council before any of those monies would be spent.
Through Your Worship, and that's correct.
Okay, so Councillor Hammond, you've asked for a deferral.
Yes.
Do I have a seconder? Councillor McLeod? Then I will call the vote. All in favor of, oh, sorry, I got to read this out. Okay, so I'll start with you, Councillor Hamlin.
Yes.
Councillor Jeffrey.
Opposed.
Councillor Berman.
Opposed.
Councillor Doherty.
Opposed.
Councillor Madigan.
Opposed.
Councillor Comey.
In favor.
Councillor McLeod.
In favor.
Deputy Mayor.
Opposed.
And I am opposed as well. So the deferral is defeated. Questions or comments, Council? Councillor Jeffrey, I had you, and then Councillor Doherty. Yeah.
Thank you, Mayor Saunderson. I'm very supportive of setting the money aside. A little different from Councillor Hamlin. I would just want to know that any of the funding that comes after the fact would go back into the fund as well. It wouldn't be spent in addition to the 2.3 we set aside. We would offset that as best we can. And if that's the understanding, then I'm fully supportive of, you know, legacy funds. I can't think of a better use than an investment in our community getting through something as major as this.
I'll look to the CAO for
Yeah,
comments.
thank you, Your Worship, and through you to Councillor Jeffrey. That's correct, and I also want to remind members of council that we have developed a mechanism to track all of our expenditure associated with COVID-19. So if and when provincial, federal, or any other money is available, we can easily access it. And if money were to come on our way, we will repopulate the asset sale fund rather than using it in addition to the 2.5. So this is basically contingency, as the name suggests, fund, rather than permanent or something that we are obligated to spend.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Doherty.
Thank you. Just a question of clarification. Would this fund be in addition to the costs that we will incur for the measures that we have agreed to take so far? So this would be deferrals of tax or water payments, costs of loss of revenue from facility operations, etc.
Through you, Your Worship, to Councillor Doherty, no, we will begin to draw down from this fund for those expenditures, because those are expenditures that are not accounted for in the 2020 budget. So whatever loss we incur, for example, I think I added up close to 250,000. We will begin to draw down from this fund, because we have no other sources to get that revenue.
Good, thank you. And if I may just continue. I appreciate Councillor Hamlin's intention to defer this decision. I'm wondering if we can leave the amount somewhat open-ended until we have had the ability, or Treasury staff have had the ability to go through the current budget and find existing sources of this money. Is it possible to make the decision to move forward, which I think is very important to do, but leave the amount open-ended?
CAO?
Sorry, Your Honor, I don't know what Councillor Doherty meant by open-ended.
So for clarification, Councillor Doherty, are you suggesting that we not establish a numerical envelope, that we are creating a reserve that's subject to the review of the 2020 budget would then be determined at a later date? Is that what you're suggesting?
Yes, or as an alternative, to state the numerical amount as indicated in the motion, but no, never mind. That's no good. No, just, oh God, now I've completely lost my train of thought. Yet not to give a numerical amount, but to state in principle that we are prepared to set aside a fund of emergency money to support our community and our businesses during this exceptional event.
I guess I'll look to the CAO. I'm not sure that undefined reserve is advisable.
Yeah, thank you, Your Honor. Yeah, I mean, I think we need to put a number on here, and we shouldn't leave it open-ended. I don't think it's good fiscal practice to leave the fund open-ended. I think there should be a limitation on it. The numbers that we provide obviously will depend somewhat on the uptake, right? So we did talk a bit about some residents might still opt to pay their bills. So the exposure that we have, the fiscal exposure, will be dependent on the uptake. But I would strongly recommend, Council, that a number be attached to the contingency fund.
I think what we're hearing, there's been a lot of very good suggestions, and I guess maybe for clarification through the CAO, notwithstanding the fact that we're going to establish this reserve of $2.5 million, staff will be reviewing the 2020 budget to find where we might have efficiencies. We're going to be scouring our books and bank accounts at Town Hall to make sure that we're leveraging every dollar in a responsible way, and the contingency will be there for those costs that we can avoid. Is that fair?
Thank you, Your Honor. We haven't formally started that exercise yet, but if it is Council's will, one thing we could do is we could take another look at the 2020 budget and bring forward some recommendations to Council on items that we might describe as discretionary for your consideration. But I just want to indicate that that's a fairly involved exercise, and the timing of it will depend on what else we've got staff involved in, because the priority right now is the delivery of critical services and redeploying staff into that area. So department heads are really working flat out to try and do some of those things. We can bring back some recommendations in that regard, but I don't want to make a promise that those recommendations will be imminent, because it will take some time for us to do what's being asked, if that's the direction of Council.
Well, I think what we're trying to do immediately is just triage the situation, and as things unfold, we can take advantage of other options to try and find ways that we can find those efficiencies. Councillor Madigan.
Thank you. If through you to Marjorie or to whoever you decide should answer this question, not to concentrate on the budget, but by percentage, what is wages and union contracts, and how much can Council realistically cut through this? I think it's great that we look at it, but let's not give them work just to give them work. They've got a lot of other important things to do, and I know they're doing their darndest every day, but it would be nice just to know realistically what can be cut from this. And I don't think Mr. Min's $2.5 million means we're going to spend it. It just means it's there just in case. But it's not going to give staff free will just to go out and start writing checks. This is a very critical time in this community's life, and if we don't put a number on something, then we won't know how much to help.
Thank you. Marjorie, are you able to assist on the and answer Councillor Madigan's question?
Through you, Your Worship, salaries and benefits represent roughly 25% of our spending. And then we have a police contract of a little better than $5 million, or right around the $5 million mark, that we can't cut out of the budget. I think I did the numbers at one time, and when you look at minimum standards and all of those other types of regulatory requirements that we have, that council probably has direct supervision or discretion over about 15% of the budget.
Follow, Councillor Hannigan?
So can we put a number on that, just for the public and for the rest of the council, please?
Yeah, Marjorie?
I'll just dig out my calculator. That would be roughly $4 million.
Thank you. Councillor Berman?
Thank you, Mayor Sampson. I want to come at this from two different angles. One, we already established that any of the 2.5 or whatever it is that's spent must be approved by the council, or have we not established that yet?
I think we had, the CAO, any drawdown from the contingency fund would be approved by council?
Absolutely, Your Honor, except for the measures that are included in today's deliberation. Any additional measures will have to come out of council for approval.
So, thanks to the province, we're sitting here now, we're able to have a meeting. Hypothetically, we could have 7 meetings a week if we wanted to. So, I'm just wondering then, like, can we not be dealing with these needs on an individual basis? Why put the lump sum aside if we're available on a daily basis to approve whatever is needed? Not a criticism, a question. Why is it necessary?
I guess for responsiveness, but I'll pass that over to the CAO.
Thank you, Your Honor. We're dealing with unprecedented times. We need to make decisions quickly. This is not an attempt to circumvent the process. This is an attempt to put something in place that is robust enough to give staff and the public the confidence that we have some ability to access some funds to deal with the crisis out there. Any future drawdown on this fund will require a council decision.
Yeah, I've got all that. Thank you. So then to go back to where the funds are coming from, they're coming from the $18.6 million
yes,
of public funds. And we did, if you guys remember back in budget time, we actually accessed $200,000 of the interest that had accumulated, but without going to the public to ask them. Ironically, it was the three of us that voted against it. So now we're going to 2.5 million because it's honestly it's the easiest place to get the money from right now, but we're not going to the public about it. I would like to see something in here that guarantees, I guess, the public that when the time comes that we are back to some sort of norm and we sit down to decide what to do with the asset sales fund, that there's a guarantee that it'll be the 18.6 million.
well, I think you put that motion on the table. I don't think there's that's a large guarantee to make. I think unprecedented times, and I agree with Councillor Jeffrey that we are making a very significant investment in trying to keep our economy and our local businesses and our residents' jobs healthy, so that when we do get through the bubble, that we will have that for them, and we will have minimized the damage to our economy. So to the extent that we are changing what we've said previously, I think this is a decision our public will want us to make, and that's a question for each of us to decide. So if you want to bring a motion to that effect, you can.
I don't disagree with anything that you've said, other than, again, back in March, when it wasn't an emergency, we did dip into the funds. We've told them all along, even through the campaign, that we were going to give them input. So I'm just trying to find something in here that doesn't have people on the street going, well, that 2.5 is going to need another 2.5 and another 2.5. And at the end of the day, we're using all of the money to get through a crisis that I agree with everybody at the table we have to do. But is there anything that anybody can offer where we use other funds successful relooking at the budget.
Well, you know what, and I will put that through the CAO. I think what we've made clear is that if we do get money from the feds or the province, it will go to backfill what we've taken out. I don't know that we want to be in a situation where we're waiting for these things because we just don't know what's happening. So, I mean, CAO, would you like to add to that?
Thank you, Worship. I'm not sure what I can add, except that Councillor Jeffrey made it clear that if you receive funding, it will provide, the first place to replenish this fund will be federal and provincial funding, if those are available. This money is needed now and is needed in the community, and we've got to find a way to ensure that we can make the money available, subject to all the spending constraints that council has. Overwhelmingly, when we spoke to the business community, and some of us were on that call yesterday, this was one place that they point us to say, this is a community fund, and we should try and find a way, if we can, to try and release some of that money for public and business renewal, because that's needed and needed now, and there is no other source for us to get any money. We don't have any other source, none.
You want to add to that, Councillor Jeffrey?
Thank you, Mayor Saunderson. I just simply wanted to the point of the guarantee. I think the guarantee is once we get through this crisis and we know what we have, we will return to that public consultation as intended. And I think the public are really pouring an outcry for help right now, so I don't think we're doing anything with the funding that we don't think the public want us to help them with. And I guess the message for me is, most important for the people, is that we're on solid ground. We have resources and we have abilities, and we're here to make them work for them. So that's the most important for me out of this.
Councillor Berman. Any other questions? Councillor Comey, and then Councillor McLeod.
Thank you, Worship. And I have to let everybody know my kids are back from as long as they could walk the dog. So I apologize for any background noise. I wanted CAO and then, I mean, your entire presentations today and this package, I believe strongly all of council supporting the community. I'm a little concerned for our residents right now when they hear words like community and funds. And I want to make sure as a counselor, I'm able to explain to them what the funds really are. So just now I'm hearing you speak to needs in our business community, which we're all very passionate about supporting, but are we seeing some of this money might be available to our residents? Could you kindly help clarify who might have access to these funds? I don't want any mixed messaging going out to our residents right now that there's funds available to them, unless I'm misunderstanding, and this is a fund available to our residents who might be in need of support at this time. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship, and through you to Councillor Comey. That's an excellent question, and I think that the reason why we decided to provide some immediate relief measures, and if you look at the relief measures, for the most part, they would provide equal benefit to the business community as well as our residents. The additional funding that we're asking council to make available, subject to us coming back and getting approval for specific expenditure, would not be exclusively for the business community. This will be, when I use the word community, I'm using it in the broadest sense of the word. I mean the town of Collingwood community, which would include our business and residents. One of the things we heard from the business leaders yesterday was, and I'm not saying this is how we will use the money, we heard a lot of issues about people who are living paycheck to paycheck, people who might lose their houses, people who don't have access to basic necessities, and people who are suffering from isolation and need some support from a mental health perspective. There's a plethora of needs out there that as a municipality, we're not obligated, nor do we have jurisdiction to do this. But you know what? In this day and age, with this crisis, there is nothing about jurisdiction, there's nothing about statutory responsibility. This is about us stepping up to the plate and responding to the needs in our community. And what we've tried to do here as staff is to bring forward a suite of proposals that hopefully will touch every segment of Collingwood at the residential level and at the business level. And on this 2.5 million, we're asking to have some offset limit that we can work with to come back to council with proposals to benefit our town. And secondly, if we are able to replenish this money from the federal, provincial government, we will use it to put it back into our Collis, Power Stream, and airport asset sale funds. We're not anxious to use this money for this purpose, but we find ourselves in a situation where we have no choice but to respond in a meaningful way. So I thank you for your comments. I thank you for all the support that you've been providing to us and feedback you've been providing to us on the social services side as well. And we're hoping that, although it's not our primary responsibility, that we can respond in a small way to do whatever we can to make a difference.
Thank you so much. That's absolutely beautiful. That's a wonderful thing. Thank you.
I lost the next in line. Was there other hands up? Councillor MacLeod.
Just to build on what Councillor Comey was asking. And I hear the passion in CAO Amin's voice, and I respect and admire it. But I remain confused about what it is that this fund is going to be used for. And so, are we thinking we are going to pay people's rent? And if so, how would we administer that and that sort of thing? I'm trying to figure out what it is we're doing or being asked to do.
Well, I think we, as the CAO has said, today is really kind of the first down payment of relief that we're going to be putting out to our residents and our community. And beyond that, we are asking staff to come back with suggestions about how else we might provide relief, how you would administer that relief, how we make sure that relief gets to the target population. It is not a simple task. And so what we are doing is giving, I think, some definition to the discussion by putting a 2.5 million window there so that we know that, or you're giving staff ideas about context in which we're looking to provide these various packages of relief that should come forward, and nothing can be done until it has come forward and been approved by this council. With that being said, I'll ask the CAO if you have additional comments.
Yeah, thank you, and through you to Councillor MacLeod. Those are all considerations. If you look at the staff report, we look at a variety of stuff. We look at, is the wage subsidy appropriate? Do we look at if we were to pay a 10% rebate on tenants' rental fees? We look at who's renting and who owns, and where will the money go? We look at waiving property taxes. We look at waiving not only deferring penalty and charges, but waiving water and wastewater rates. So we've looked at a suite of options, and many of those options are very expensive. So we haven't ruled out any option, but we didn't want to do something that's not impactful. So before we spend the money, we want to make sure that whatever we're doing resonates with the residents and business owners who will benefit from this. And we want to hear directly from them. So we've done the math. We know what this suite of ideas and proposals could potentially be, but we don't want to execute them unless and until we know that they are impactful. So the money could be spent for a variety of things. For me, the criteria would be transparency, accountability, impact, and also measured in the sense that this might be a long transition before we get back to some normalcy. So we've got to make sure that we don't spend all of it at once, and we're measured in our response so that we can stretch the funds as long as we can, subject to whatever the federal Ontario might come up with.
And I think that's a big variable right now. We don't know what the federal or provincial packages are going to look like and how they're going to impact our residents, and so we don't want to double up. We want to make sure that what we do has major impact and benefit for our residents.
And so a follow-up to that, through you, Your Worship, to CAO Amin, you say you have a suite of things that you're thinking through for this fund to be spent on. When might we see that list as a council?
CAO?
Thank you, Your Worship. We're just working through the various suite of programs. We've got a lot of the background information done, Councillor. So, we could I mean, I could circulate something to council in the next couple of weeks or so to provide a full range of all the considerations for your information. So it's not we're not going to be able to recommend any option or communicate what we might plan on doing, but we can provide you with all the information that we have on the various considerations we have quantified. So we can do that in fairly short order.
But to be
That's
clear,
helpful.
thank you. But to be clear, we're not spending any of this until such time as council says yes to spending it.
Through your worship, again, no. We're only spending what council approved today. Any subsequent expenditure will come before council for their approval.
Oh, okay. So the 2.5 that we're approving as a community fund is we're just putting it aside so that we can use it someday in the future when we see this suite of stuff.
Through your worship, it's contingency fund, it's not a community fund. And the only expense that will be deducted from the fund will be whatever decision council makes today. And again, that's subject to how many people, how much uptake we get on the tax deferral and the water waste deferral.
So one more follow-up at least. Sorry. So the $2.5 million that we're taking out of the Collis sale, that we're voting whether to take out of the Collis sale, we are going to, as of today, direct that money to cover the costs of people who decide to defer their property tax and their water and wastewater bills. Is that what I'm to take from that? That's already going to be spent?
Yes, it's covering the cost of the measures that we're implementing today, yes.
Which we estimate at somewhere around what?
CAO?
Through your worship, I did some quick math, and again, it is depend on what the uptake is, but based on the information I have before me, we're looking at least somewhere between $250,000 and $300,000 just on the property tax and the water wastewater deferral.
So that I'm absolutely clear on what it is that I'm voting on. We are setting aside 2.5, but it's not 2.5. It is now down to 2.2 or 2.1, depending on the uptake on these measures.
Once that reserve is set aside on the vote, then it will be used to pay down the uptake on the measures that we have approved, which could be an upset limit, I would believe, of $300,000. Yes.
Thank you.
Sorry, Your Worship, I just want to make sure that I'm not misleading staff, council with numbers. Marjorie, correct me if I'm wrong, but my estimate was on the tax and water, we're looking at, for the 3 months, approximately $250,000 to $300,000.
That would, through you, Your Worship, that would be correct. It's
Okay.
the waiving of the penalties and interest. Yes, that would be correct.
Thank you.
And so that leaves 2.2 for us to decide about later. Or
yes,
perhaps
depending on how that shakes out, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Jeffrey?
I think I might have seen Deputy Mayor Hall.
Oh, sorry, Deputy Mayor?
Thank you. I just wanted to convey to the other 8 around the table and to staff that I think that this conversation has been excellent, and I think it's important that these questions are answered so we all clearly understand where this money is being drawn upon, how it potentially could be spent. My comment is just in speaking with members of the community, and particularly the business community, and I don't mean to sound like an alarmist, but when you look at where we were in January, February, and where we are today, I think that we as a council need to be prepared to have conversations beyond 2.5 million. And so my comment is more of a gut check, and I'll simply leave it at that.
Thank you. Councillor Ham.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I participated in a conference call this morning with some of the community leaders, including people in the social services sector. And they have been engaging in discussions with the Prime Minister's office and senior people in other federal ministers' office. And the message they're getting is to go slow on what is being rolled out, and that everyone should try to avoid making decisions all at once. And in particular, because it may become possible for every organization, and in that I'll include municipalities, to leverage opportunities of others. So I'll just give an example, and I'm totally making this one up, but if the United Way decided to implement a program of some kind that we are able to then piggyback on to, you know, the benefit of our residents, that's better than us going out and creating a program. So I'm mentioning this because I know things aren't going to unfold in the next 24 hours for us. I think we've taken a very good step today on the property tax and wastewater front. But I would just like to, you know, bring to the table what I did hear this morning that the federal government is telling the other organizations it's dealing with that are hoping to bring out programs to help, to take it slow, be incremental, look for gaps, look to leverage opportunities that become available. And so in addition, I wanted to suggest that perhaps before the suite of measures comes back to us from staff, that we have that opportunity to look at our 2020 budget. I, of course, heard that there's, you know, maybe not tons of room there, but there's some room if we're not, you know, I'll just put out there an example of our traffic calming measures, which I feel very strongly about, but perhaps for the next 4 or 5 months, we're not going to have a lot of traffic. And that's something, you know, $60,000 that could be deferred to 2021. So I just give that as a tiny example, and whether we should be striking a budget committee that would comprise perhaps 2 council members that would meet with the senior staff and come up with some ideas and bring them back to council. So I just wanted to put that out on the table as suggestions for our staff and for council to think about. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hamlin, and I think all those suggestions are duly noted. So we'll certainly have staff look at those moving forward. Was there another hand up? Councillor Jeffrey.
Yeah, just a comment, not really a question, I don't think, but the amounts that we're deferring, those aren't something that's being spent. There's the expectation that they're going to come in eventually, maybe late. The cost part is the waiving of the penalties and the fees. So not everything here today is going to cost us in the long term. It's just impacting our cash flow in the short term.
Yes, that's accurate. Seeing no more questions or comments, then, Councillor McLeod.
Thank you. I think that I would like to ask for an amendment to this particular piece of our discussion, and that amendment would be something along the lines of what Councillor Hamlin has been suggesting, which is that we definitely have a look at the budget and at projects that are not going to happen this year because of COVID, that we could redirect that unspent spending to go into this fund as well, or to find that money so that we can put it back if we can at all. So, for example, we've had conversations regarding, just off the top of my head, the splash pad. So there's a certain number of dollars that has been allocated towards that this year. If social distancing is still required for the foreseeable future, that is a project that we could possibly put on hold for a year, and that's a certain number of dollars that we are not going to be spending as part of our budget. And I think that we may need to, it may be wise for us to have a look at all of those sorts of projects, because we are in unprecedented times. Let's find unprecedented things and things to do, and have a look at all of the stuff that's on the table and that's in the budget. So I would like to move an amendment to this particular piece that makes it contingent on looking at the budget and finding unspent spending.
I will look for a seconder, and I think it all comes down to a question of timing, and I don't think there's any debate that we will look for those efficiencies moving forward, but the issue is whether or not that constrains our ability to provide the relief when we need it. So I'll look for a seconder. Is there anyone who seconds that amendment? Councillor Berman. Discussion on the amendment then. Councillor Berman?
I'm seconding it and I'll vote for it, but I think it's exactly what the CAO said was going to be happening anyhow, so I don't think there's any harm in.
Well, I guess it comes to a question of timing then, and maybe Councillor McLeod could confirm this for me. Are you saying that nothing moved forward in the contingency fund until this budget reappraisal has happened and reassessment has happened? Or are you saying that in conjunction with this contingency fund, you would like staff moving forward to re-examine when time permits the 2020 budget to find efficiencies that might be able to backfill some of the funds spent out of the contingency fund? So the timing to me is a question. If you can clarify that, I'd appreciate it.
For me, the timing would be that it actually does happen, and that it does not. So maybe we need to put a date on it. But I think that it does have to happen in parallel. In my personal choice would be that it would happen in parallel, and that it must happen. And that, okay. So what I want it articulated that it happened.
Right, and I'm going to look to the CAO, but I think we've heard from the treasurer that they're going to be drawing people over just to handle the tax changes potentially. So we're going to be drawing out of manpower from other areas out of treasury to do that. CAO?
Thank you, Your Worship. And just to reiterate what I said earlier, I think, we're looking at this. In fact, right now as we speak, given the situation we're dealing with, we've got to reallocate staff, look at putting resources where we need it. The Treasury Department has very limited capacity to do this and bring forward a recommendation in advance of us accessing this $2.5 million. It's only prudent and it's good financial and budgetary management to do this. But my only concern is that we don't have the capacity to do this and bring forward recommendations with the kind of detail that I'm hearing in advance of us accessing this $2.5 million. We don't have that capacity or flexibility in the system to be able to do that imminently.
And by way of follow-up, though, would we have, hopefully, depending on the role, how long we are in this crisis, but would we have capacity in the calendar year, assuming that we get through it, to do that type of assessment later and make the adjustments after the fact?
Through Your Worship, absolutely. I mean, I think we have no choice, but we'll have to bring forward some revised budget deliberation to this council. But the timing of that is, I guess, what I'm putting forward to council for its consideration. We have to do that because the choices we're making today in response to the crisis would require that we take a look at our budget. And I would expect that we'll probably come back with something later on in the summer to provide some recommendations at council on what might be a reprioritization of issues. But I don't think we have the capacity to do it now.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor, you had your hand up.
Thank you again through you to the colleagues. Again, I think this is an important discussion, and I just go back to my prior comments regarding the gut check. When we come through this on the other side, I hope I'm wrong, but I don't think that we'll be talking about $2.5 million. I think that when our staff look at some of the other opportunities, whether it be reduction in budget, whether it be stimulants that the business community, the arts community, et cetera, are looking for, whether it's this task force that comes back to us with various recommendations, and expenses that we in turn will have to dole out over a period of time just to keep the operation rolling along to ensure that all of our essential services are met that are statutory. this is going to exceed 2.5. And I really think that we need to get our head around that. The other part of my comment would relate to that it is important to find efficiencies, and it is important to maybe put things on hold, but it is also important to bear in mind that we are one of the largest economic generators within the community itself. And we will be looking to the federal government and the provincial government to inject monies into our community. But the mayor knows, as well as anybody, on a weekly basis, we sign hundreds of checks that go into the community that continue to move business along. And those members in the community, whether it's engineering firms, whether it's construction firms, et cetera, they too will be relying on some of these projects that were already in the works. So I'm just saying it's a much, much larger macro picture that we're looking at. This is a great conversation, and I'm glad that we're having it, but let's let staff start the process today. Let them come back with recommendations, and then let's have a much broader conversation when we actually have numbers to take a look at that point.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Any other comments or questions on the amendment before I call the vote? Seeing none, sorry?
Just for clarity on what that amendment is, through your worship, members of council, this is what I have wrote down. The council requests staff review the 2020 budget and determine potential financial efficiencies and projects that are not going to be completed because of the COVID-19 pandemic or other matters that may arise, and allocate those monies to the contingency fund to reduce the use of the asset sale proceeds for this fund.
Councillor McLeod, does that accurately reflect your motion?
It does indeed.
Okay. Then I will call the vote, and I think I'm starting now. Councillor Jeffrey.
Well, I need clarification
Sure.
as to timing. I'm opposed to the amendment if it's going to hamstrap our staff into trying to produce something that would impede our nimbleness in the short term.
Okay, Councillor McLeod, it's a question of timing again. So if you can just clarify, and maybe the wording has to be amended.
I am not married to any particular time frame. But I would like that work to be done, and my goal here is to have that work being done, being articulated, so that we know that work is going to be taking place. That's all. I don't have a time.
So if it happens in the calendar year, as the CAO suggested it would, is that sufficient, or do you want this done before we start? Pardon me?
No, it does not have to happen prior to anything, I want to be sure that, and I think that CAO Amin and I are in agreement that this work needs to be done. I just want to have it written down somewhere that we're going to do it. That's all.
Okay, so CAO?
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I just want to clarify, and again, this is reflecting on looking at the clerk, because the way the motion reads is that we can't spend any of this money until we do the efficiency review, and that will be the first place that we look to draw down from any support for the community. And that's where I think that nuance is what's worrying me, is that I think it has to be done, it should be done. My only consideration for council's, my only offer for council's consideration is that the staff not be restricted to draw down from the 2.5 prior to conducting this review. And I'll make one other point before I shut up, which is if we find money from the contingency from that contingency review, that money will go back into the contingency fund, or they call it sale funds, right? So we'll repopulate whatever we use with any efficiency that we would have derived.
So can I make a recommendation?
Yeah.
I guess just maybe what we do is, and Councillor McLeod, you can tell me if I'm capturing what you intend, but can we add a second paragraph that would say, and that council instructs staff within the fiscal year to conduct a review of the 2020 budget to find any efficiencies as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic or others, and apply those efficiencies to replenish the contingency fund. Is that what you're really looking for?
That is what I'm looking for. Thank you, Your Worship. My thought is that there are going to be projects that are not going to take place, and that I would like to see those dollars that we have allocated for those projects removed from, reclaimed from the budget and put into this fund, which I, with respect to the Deputy Mayor, I get is going to be bigger. My plan is to find more money that we will need. And so if we find it in projects that aren't going to take place, then okay, I'm fine with that. But let's do that work.
Yeah, and I think if the wording that the CAO is nodding, and I think from a fiscal and accountability and transparency perspective, I think there's no disagreement around the table on that. I think we just want to make sure we have the wording correctly put in place so that we're not tying the hands of staff while we move forward with the allocation or working on the measures that we might use to tap into the contingency fund. So I'm going to look to the clerk to see if you've got some wording there we might use.
Sorry, I hate to.
You're going back on your word.
No, I'm not going back on my word, but I think what I want to make it clear to council as well is that, and as part of our budget review, we'll do this. But, you know, and that's why I use the word discretionary in my comment, because there are certain funds that we cannot use for any other purpose. So there might be projects that are postponed or deferred, right. But there might be DC funds, there might be funds dedicated for certain specific projects that we have no flexibility on. So I don't want to mislead council. There's going to be capital projects that are deferred, there are going to be operational costs that are deferred, but the word discretionary is important because some of these monies cannot be used for other purposes as a result of statutory and other obligations.
Okay, so while clerk's working on that, Councillor Doherty, you have your hand up.
Yes, thank you. And I believe that the statement that CAO just made now helps me out, but my concern in doing a review of the budget and automatically making cuts to the budget based on what we don't believe we can do this year may hamstring us significantly next year, because I am already anticipating that our budget process for 2021 is going to be very circumspect. And so I would not want to be committing to cutting funds this year with no view to perhaps putting them into a reserve for next year. Am I making myself clear? Sorry.
No, I think so. I think what you're saying is that, you know, it's fluid, and if a project gets delayed, it's going to show up on the books next year. And so how do you fund it the following year? And I would ask the CAO to respond to that.
Thank you, Worship. And that's a really good point that Councillor Doherty raises. That's why the province is doing economic update and not a multi-year projection, because all the numbers that we're working with could be out of the window. And I just want to reflect back on a few comments the Deputy Mayor made, and he's absolutely dead on in terms of his analysis. But I think all those considerations can be brought forward once that review is complete. What's discretionary, what's not, should we put in a reserve somewhere for 2021, if that's what council decides. But I think all of the decisions can be deferred once the efficiency review, if that's what we're calling it, is done and complete, and the recommendations are brought forward to council. We'll see the size of that pot, and then we can decide how we want to spend that money, whether it's spending it now or deferring it for a later date. So I think some of those decisions can be made at the time when that efficiency review is brought forward for council's consideration.
Okay. Clerk, how are you doing on the wording?
Certainly, that, Your Worship, Members of Council, that was the original intent. So the motion would still be that with the understanding that 2.5 is going in there, and then after this review is completed, whether it takes a year or 6 months, or that any of those efficiencies be given some discretion, whether they be allocated to supplement that contingency fund to reduce the use of the asset sale proceeds, use. I understand that's the intent.
Councillor McLeod?
Good to go.
Good to go.
Councillor
Okay.
Berman, are you happy with that as well, since you were the seconder?
Councillor Berman?
I am.
Councillor Berman's good with that as well. So then we will be dealing first with the amendment. And so I guess I'm starting then with Councillor Jeffrey. And did that bring clarity for you?
It did, but because I think the amendment is only asking what staff has, I've heard them commit to, I'm going to vote against the amendment.
Okay. So a nay. Councillor Berman?
In favor.
Councillor Doherty?
I also will vote against, but only because I am operating on the assumption that staff would do this regardless.
Councillor Madigan?
Against.
Councillor Comey?
In favor.
Councillor McLeod?
In favor.
Deputy Mayor Hall?
I'm going to vote in favor.
I will also vote in favor. And Councillor Hamlin? Councillor Hamlin, how do you vote on the amendment?
Sorry, in favor.
Okay, so that is passed with, I think, 3 opposed. And now we're back to the main motion, moved by Deputy Mayor Hall and seconded by Councillor McLeod. Be it resolved that Council authorize the establishment of a Collingwood Emergency Contingency Fund from the asset sale proceeds. These funds would be accessed only for the support of the community through the pandemic, and once the provincial state of emergency has ended, any remaining funds be returned to the sale proceeds fund. And I'm just going to look to the clerk for clarification. We don't mention the 2.5 million in there. Is it necessary to put that value in there?
Being valuable.
Okay, so I'm going to read the first sentence again for clarity, that Council authorized the establishment of a Collingwood Emergency Contingency Fund of $2.5 million from the asset sale proceeds. And that the balance of the motion remains the same. So unless there's any comments or questions, I'm going to call the vote. So Councillor Berman?
In favor.
Councillor Doherty?
In favor.
Councillor Madigan?
In favor.
Councillor Comey?
In favor.
Councillor McLeod?
In favor.
Deputy Mayor Hall?
In favor.
I am in favor. Councillor Hamlin?
In favor.
Councillor Jeffrey?
In favor.
And that is passed unanimously. So I guess I should have read as amended on that one. So as amended by Councillor McLeod's motion. The next item deals with the emergency management program, adopting the bylaw to amend that. Do we need to speak specifically to, well, I'll put it on the floor and then I'll look to the clerk and the chief. So it's moved by Deputy Mayor Hall, seconded by Councillor McLeod. Be it resolved that Council enact and pass amendments to the emergency management program bylaw as identified herein. Chief, clerk, I don't know who wants to speak to that. Chief, since we kept you here all afternoon.
I can speak loud enough if that's okay.
If you can, that would be great, Chief.
The idea behind this is that we've worked over the last
Sorry, I'm just
year.
going to interrupt. Can everybody hear that okay? Is everyone hearing all right? Okay,
Yes.
we got the thumbs up. So go ahead.
So the idea of this, we've been working over the last year to redo our plan, which is Schedule A of the bylaw. With the plan, there's, as I said, my emergency management 101 with you a couple months or a month ago, there's a public sector and a private part of the plan. Councillor Hamlin caught that there was one thing missing out of the definition of the plan, which I don't know if there was a link, and that's why it didn't get moved forward to the website. But that's another reason I'm asking for these authorities. The plan changes so rapidly I was bringing it, gonna put it on the agenda and have this here for March, and this, with the pandemic arising, it kind of superseded what I wanted to do, but then we thought it was important that I had the opportunity to adapt it. Over the last week, I could probably make about 30 changes to the plan and any of the appendix in the, in Schedule A of the plan, because of what's coming out with recommendations from both health sectors and from emergency management through the Emergency Management and Civil Protection Act. So this is why this is on the table. The plan has been condensed. We went from a folder this big to a folder this big. The public plan is maybe about not even a quarter inch, but the private plan is 3 inches big. And that's what we operate our emergency center on. I do apologize, the council doesn't have full access to the private plan, but that's how the act's set up right now. And I believe that could change with, it's not relevant to freedom of information, so I don't have to release anything in the private, but I think in the future you'll see that there'll be updates and better understanding through council, given more rights to see the private part of the plan. So that's kind of basic, my description there. It's easy to follow, and that would, with what Councillor Hammond brought up, that was the intent to get this forward and to have that authority, so I'm not back here every week at council or committee trying to get something updated that I'm mandated and regulated through regulation and Ontario regs.
Good, thank you. Council, any questions for the chief? You nailed it. Oh, Councillor McLeod. Go ahead.
So through you, your worship, to Chief Part. So we are being asked to vote on changing a plan that we can't see. Is that what I'm to make of this?
So under the bylaw, the plan is part of Schedule A, and in Schedule A, there's two parts of that plan. So there's in Schedule A, the plan has the public and private, and the private is constantly ongoing, evolving. It's a living document with contact numbers. When we switch from Collis to EBCOR, I have to change that. If Marjorie, the treasurer retires, I have to change all that. In the public plan, usually we don't have a lot of change in there, but that's what drives the private plan in that. I also asked to remove Schedule D. Another Ontario reg mandates me to do a risk assessment with the municipality, so we're able to remove Schedule D out of the plan and lessen what was there. That was public information, and it was a lot of private information that was being made public, so that's why they changed the Ontario reg to allow us to change it and remove it from the emergency management section and put it in another reg that we have the mandatory report, that outcome and those contacts within. I hope that helped. I know it's a little confusing, but really what you're doing is approving an emergency plan that your emergency control group can operate and or establish and operate during times like this if we ever do declare.
Thank you.
It's like an operational approval.
And I guess speaking on behalf of the deputy mayor and myself, we participate in drills, exercises once a year, and certification, and a lot of this is very much legislated, the requirements from the province and the approvals that we have to get on an annual basis. So I guess, for lack of a better word, this is really some housekeeping that we need to take care of in order to make sure our plan's up to date.
Yeah, through your worship, yeah, absolutely. And it's the other thing, our plan, we just don't do it, and I sit there and give it to you and say it's all good. As the mayor said, it's approved, it has to go to the province annually and get approval on the plan that we're meeting all requirements under the Emergency Management and Civil Protection Act. So.
Any other questions or comments, Council? Councillor Hamlin.
Thank you. I'd just like to follow up on the point that Councillor McLeod has raised. And it just seems contrary to common sense to me that we would be voting to amend a schedule that we say is attached to the bylaw, but in fact we can't see it and it's not attached to the bylaw. So I'm just looking at the bylaw itself, and there's 4 parts to it. And I'm wondering if all we need are the 3rd and 4th paragraph to be a functioning bylaw. Because 1 is us amending Schedule A attached to the bylaw, which isn't attached and that we can't see. The paragraph 2 is for us deleting Schedule D, which of course is not attached and can't see. However, paragraph 3 says we delegate authority to the fire chief to amend the schedules. So perhaps, and then 4 is just saying this is going to come into effect pretty soon. So maybe we could take out, this would be my amendment, to remove paragraphs 1 and 2 and renumber paragraphs 3 and 4, 1 and 2. And then I believe that would allow us then, as I say, to give authority to the fire chief to amend the management plan and its schedules any way he wants, but doesn't sort of make a farce out of what we're doing. So that would be my suggestion, if I could get a seconder for that.
And I'll look to the clerk.
Or through your worship, just for clarification, so Schedule A is attached and was provided as part of the agenda. The only one that wasn't provided because it's being removed isn't part of the public document. It's a risk profile that's done annually regardless.
To your worship, yes.
So
Yeah,
the Schedule A is provided publicly and provided to members of council.
Yeah, it's just what is not provided to council and the public, that's not on our emergency control group, is the appendix to Schedule A. And that's everywhere from our flood contingency plan, hydroelectric plan, which is not public information because they have their acts to winter snow event plan. All these specific plans are in the appendix A to J or to even farther. So, and then we also have the flood contingency plan that's not an appendix that is part of it. So again, the intent that Councillor Hammond did say, that's really the biggest wish of mine, but it's again through the clerk how progress and procedure follows to how we do that bylaw.
Thank you.
Hammond,
Yeah, as a follow-up then, so I guess I do understand. So what I was confusing with I was confusing Schedule A with Annex A, I guess. So Schedule A is in fact the emergency response plan that's been updated. Through you, Mr. Mayor, is that correct?
That's correct.
yes.
And paragraph 2, which references Schedule D, what in fact is that?
Chief?
Schedule B was a review of any infrastructure and community risks. So the Ontario government just passed legislation that by 2023 we do annual reporting on that. So they removed it out of this to allow us not to have to include it in the emergency plan. But I still annually have to do a emergency risk or a community risk assessment and produce that to the province as part of my mandate. So that's why we just are allowed to take it out of the plan or out of the bylaw, and I do it I report it in another way, which I can also share with council when I do it, but I don't know if you'd understand a lot of the provincial jargon that you have to put in it to be better, or to explain it best, but that's what Schedule D is.
Thank you, that's really helpful, and I withdraw my concerns. That's satisfied me, thank you.
Okay. Any other questions or comments, council, before I call the vote? And I've lost my paper. We are now starting with you, Councillor Doherty.
In favor.
Councillor Madigan.
In favor.
Councillor Comey.
In favor.
Councillor McLeod.
In favor.
Deputy Mayor.
In favor.
I am in favor. Councillor Hamlin.
In favor?
Councillor Jeffrey.
In favor.
And Councillor Berman.
In favor.
So that has passed unanimously. And now I have the actual bylaw. So it's moved by Deputy Mayor Hall and seconded by Councillor McLeod. Be it resolved that bylaw 2020-21, being a bylaw to amend bylaw number 2016-90, emergency management program and emergency response plan for the town of Collingwood, be enacted and passed this 25th day of March 2020. I'm assuming there's no questions or comments, but if there is, let me know. I'm now going to go through, so we are now starting with Councillor Madigan.
In favor.
Councillor Comey.
In favor.
Councillor McLeod.
In favor.
Deputy Mayor Hall.
In favor?
I am in favor. Councillor Hamlin,
In favor?
Councillor Jeffrey,
In favor?
Councillor Berman,
In favor.
and Councillor Doherty.
She said in favor.
In favor.
Thank you. The next item up for discussion, and just because this block jumped up on my screen, it may have come up on yours as well at home, but according to the news feed, the provincial government has just approved $17 billion, or I guess put on the floor, $17 billion for COVID-19 relief, and hopefully we'll know the particulars of that as we move forward. The next item is Deputy Mayor Hall, moved by Deputy Mayor Hall and seconded by Councillor MacLeod. Be it resolved, the council herein delegate additional authority to the CAO during the COVID-19 pandemic for matters deemed necessary and minor in nature as described herein. Council, any questions or comments? Councillor Doherty?
Thank you. What is different in this motion as opposed to our original delegation of authority to CAO?
I'll look at the CAO to answer that. Or you want to answer that? The clerk's going to answer that.
Certainly, through your worship to members of council. The difference is during our emergency meeting that we held on March the 13th, the delegated authority, even though we expressly discussed what that would look like and options that were minor in nature that the CAO could take with that authority, the wording in the actual resolution, as pointed out, is specific to only extending or reinstating programs or services. It doesn't provide any additional authorities, and being clear that there is additional authorities that he could be granted in the process to undertake those, that use of that power has been identified in the report.
Does that assist, Councillor Doherty?
Yes, thank you.
Other questions or comments? Councillor Jeffrey?
Just briefly, I think in his report, the CEO referred to reallocating resources. Is that human resources, financial resources? What resources are defined in that word?
Oh, to the CAO.
Thank you, Your Honor, and through you to Councillor Jeffrey. It's primarily human resources. It's dealing with the pressures across the organization and how we might allocate resources to optimize our business continuity plan. I don't plan on reallocating money assigned to projects or anything of that sort.
Just wanted to clarify. Thank you.
Any other questions, Council? Seeing none, I will call the vote, and I think I'm starting with who did I start with last time? Okay, so Councillor Comey.
In favor.
Councillor MacLeod.
Favor.
Deputy Mayor Hall.
In favor?
I am in favor. Councillor Hamlin.
In favor?
Councillor Jeffrey.
In favor?
Councillor Berman.
In favor.
Councillor Doherty.
In favor.
And Councillor Madigan.
In favor.
That is passed unanimously. The next item is advocacy piece, moved by Deputy Mayor Hall and seconded by Councillor MacLeod. Be it resolved that council petition the federal and provincial government and applicable advocacy organizations to continue to work with municipal governments, local businesses, and the community to implement changes as quickly and prudently as possible with respect to financial relief and programs to benefit Ontarians and in particular small businesses and tourism. Questions or comments, Council? If I'm actually going to ask Councillor Jeffrey a question, just maybe you can update us on how the discussions have been going through FCM and what kind of response you're getting.
Thank you very much. So the most important message, Mayor Saunderson, from FCM was an open dialogue with municipalities to cover off any help that they needed advocacy for that had not been covered off in our initial conference call. I was able to provide that report to staff and council. So it's important, and one of my questions here is I hope that we're taking the opportunity. I know we have Mayor Saunderson has forwarded a couple of great suggestions from our business community in terms of advocacy that we need at the federal, not just the federal, but that's who I'm dealing with at FCM. So I've been able to do that. So the things that FCM have been touching on and I'm hoping to bring in under other business I'll cover them under there because they're kind of independent of this, but I would expect no less than that we have to be doing this.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments, Council? Councillor Hamlin.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I noticed during our CAO's presentation, he mentioned looking for approval to write to senior levels of government in support of our tourism industry. Is it applicable? Is it possible in this section to add that authority in? And maybe this is a question through you, Mr. Mayor, to our CAO.
CAO, do you think does this resolution give you the direction you need, or should we be amending it?
I don't think we need to amend it. I mean, the intention here was to, Your Honor, try and write letters in support of other municipalities to elevate some of the discussions we've had with our community and with our business leaders. And that would include all aspects of the economy, tourism, small business, the accommodation industry, and the like. So okay. I don't think we need to amend it. We'll exercise judgment in using whatever instruments it would work.
Okay. Is that assist, Councillor Hamlin?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Good. Any other questions or comments before I call a vote? Seeing none, and I'm starting now with Deputy Mayor.
I'm in favor.
I'm in favor. Councillor Hamlin?
In favor?
Councillor Jeffrey?
Definitely in favor.
Councillor Berman?
In favor.
Councillor Doherty?
In favor.
Councillor Madigan?
In favor.
Councillor Comey?
In favor.
And Councillor McLeod?
In favor.
That is passed unanimously. My agenda here. So 8 on the agenda, notices of motion. Are there any notices of motion? Seeing none. County update. Oh, sorry. Councillor Comey.
Thank you, Worship. My last understanding from Clerk Almos is I believe this would come under notice of motion, but I'll look to both the clerk and CAO Amin and possibly Treasurer Leonard. But I'll begin by saying that I caught my attention in the budget, the $150,000 funds allocated for hospital redevelopment. And that coincided with seeing a plea from our hospital for PPE equipment from the community. They've asked any businesses or residents who might have any extra to come forward. And so I thought I would bring to council the idea that possibly we amend the purposes of those funds to be available to both and or hospital redevelopment or the need for PPE equipment during this time.
Okay, in discussion with the clerk, she has recommended this come up under item 10.1.1, and we can deal with it there under other business where direction may be provided. So definitely going to deal with that.
Okay, thank you so much.
Okay. Did I see another hand? No, okay. County report, Deputy Mayor, you just give us a brief comment on the status of the affairs at the county and the measures that they've been taking as a result, or we have been taking at the county level as a result of the COVID-19.
Well, thank you, Mayor Saunderson. I think everyone around the table knows, and probably the vast majority, that the county was one of the larger upper tier municipalities to declare a state of emergency. And in doing so, had really started to implement a number of best practices even prior to making such a declaration. Council as a whole was advised that we would not be meeting for the month of March. And in fact, our next meeting will be April the 14th. And that meeting will be conducted in a similar fashion to the way that we are meeting this afternoon. in some type of digital format or audio format. The county, as you know, operates many of the essential services to our community and neighboring municipalities, whether it be residents for senior care, whether it be for ambulatory care, whether it be the pickup and removal of waste. These are all deemed essential services, and the county maintains and is continuing to ensure that those services are executed in the way and shape that our residents expect. Landfill sites were closed to the public. There has been some discussion that potentially they may be reopened, but on a modified schedule, as well as ways in which we would access. And information, if that was to change, would certainly be made available to the public through the various social media, website, et cetera, channels that the county so diligently uses to communicate. I think that's it. I mean, really, I think the mayor and I have spoken very highly, and those who have worked with the county in the past know that we have a fantastic staff, and the staff at the senior level have a wealth of team members throughout all the various departments to be able to ensure the county's resources are being expedited in a judicious manner to ensure that we are meeting this global pandemic head on behalf of the residents. And I think that they are doing an excellent job. I did want to pass along, this has nothing related to our meeting today, nothing related to COVID-19, but a sad note on behalf of the county. This is the third member of our county council this term, but the deputy mayor for Ramara Township, John O'Donnell, who is serving his second term, passed away this morning due to cancer. And so I, on behalf of mayor and the municipality, the town of Collingwood, want to pass along my condolences to the deputy mayor, John O'Donnell's family, to his colleagues in Ramara, and to our colleagues within the county who have gotten to know, and for those who've known him much longer than I have, who have tremendous respect, have really enjoyed the opportunity of working with him. He is very highly regarded within Ramara Township and was highly regarded at the county level as well. Thank you.
Yes, I would just add my own personal note. John, I got to know John quite well, and he was famous at county for constantly winning the Warden's Curling Briar, and a very good golfer too. He'd been battling cancer since approximately 2003, and I think it all came as a shock to us because we all figured the man was indestructible, but he will be greatly missed. Thank you, Deputy Mayor. So under other business 10.1, we have a number of other municipal support opportunities, and Councillor Comey, I'll let you lead off since we had deferred your item down to this.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I appreciate that. I suppose I would just restate what I had said earlier, which was it certainly caught my attention that these funds are there. I think during this time of crisis, it's reasonable that if our hospital has a call out for PPE equipment that hopefully they won't have to use, but may well need to, that we make these funds available for that purpose.
I'll look to the CAO or Treasurer just to confirm the status of the funds.
Through your worship, I'll ask the Treasurer to confirm the status of those funds.
Marjorie?
Okay.
Sorry, Marjorie, we lost you. Yes?
Yeah, I had to mute and unmute. Those funds were actually removed from the budget. They're not in there anymore. And I don't believe it's actually the funding that the hospital is having trouble with as much as it is actually sourcing the equipment. The products are just not out there in the marketplace.
Right. Certainly I saw the call out as well, and I'm wondering if there's a way that their municipality can assist the hospital as our frontline care facility for our residents. So I guess I'm open to suggestions. Councillor Comey, if you want to ask that a portion of the contingency fund be made available to the hospital for purchasing necessary supplies during this pandemic, or what would you like to proceed with?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think that's very reasonable, and I appreciate the treasurer's comments. Of course, they're just a mass shortage to them altogether, but maybe they'll have to pay a premium or some such thing. I think my thought is that this council will be supportive of that idea, that of making funds available to our hospital at this time. So I would be open to that very much so. Perhaps we could leave it with CAO admin to have a discussion with Nora and see what their needs are and come back to council as soon as he can, ideally, and let us know and move forward from there.
CAO, is that? The CEO is giving a nod of agreement. Well, you can see him too. So I think that's a great way to proceed, and we'll reach out to the hospital and see how best we can assist them with the supply shortage.
Wonderful, thank you.
Now, the items that are listed on here, were they raised by council? Should I be, so was number one morale boosting, morale building?
I think it was on my list here.
Okay, so, well then why don't I do this? I'll pass it over to you, Councillor Jeffrey, and you can carry us through, and if any items get left out, I'll canvass council with those.
Okay. All right, so the ones that are on the list, I just was trying to come up in my mind of a way to start kind of a think tank and how we could help. And the morale building and celebrate and reward frontline workers, again, that would be something I would ask maybe staff to think about. And oddly enough, with the hospital, I originally was thinking lunches and things, but they can't process food safely into their facility. So my second thing was to go to their list. I know they're publishing online because they're asking people to go online to see what it is they need rather than just send things that they're not asking for. So I think Councillor Comey's suggestion is a really good one that way. But we have so many people on so many positions that are on the front line, and I really think we need to maybe find a way that we can support them somehow. So I'm just going to leave that out there. Somebody may have a better idea than me in that. The transit cab fares was one to think about in the case where we do have to shut down our transit. We have a vulnerable population who still need to get to appointments or get to healthcare or get to a pharmacy, and that we would have some kind of contingency plan there to make sure, by definition of however we define vulnerable, that they have the ability to get where they need to go. The dog parks, I think we've taken care of. I have been concerned with a number of people still getting together in dog parks and things, so I think we've addressed that already. And the outreach part was, for me, it also perhaps could be a gap in communication, but there are so many seniors and people out there who do not communicate through social media. So how are we as a town getting our message out to those people so that they can feel the same comfort and have the same opportunity to participate in some of the things we're offering, but no, we're also here for support. So there was just that comment. And then lastly, something I've been receiving a lot of emails and calls about is, there's no delicate way to put it, is the migration of large urban population into our small urban catchment area and putting extra pressure on our resources for our residents. So the motion I would like considered is to advocate with the provincial government to restrict mobility of large urban centers into small urban centers, to prohibit the derailment of our community, our small community resources. So I don't know, it's a statement to them. I know they've closed provincially, we've closed countries, we've closed access provincially and territorial, but there is this major shift I know being experienced by a lot of small municipalities like Bakerville outside of Edmonton, like there's a lot of us out there, but for us in Ontario, I know that a lot of our rental, properties are still being used by people from outside of our area. So it might take a provincial directive to give us the capacity to enforce. And that's about as sensitive as I can put it, but we need to protect our community, and bringing other inflicted patients into our community isn't going to help us flatten the curve here. And that's all I have.
Okay. I do want to pick up on the assist with the food delivery. That's been an ongoing discussion with Jennifer Parker and other staff at Town Hall with 211. There was a teleconference last Friday that I participated with, the United Way of Grey Bruce, and they have an online platform there, We Do, that matches volunteers or recruits volunteers, and then also residents in need for things like food delivery, medication and other essentials, as well as just social time. So we're trying to get that platform up and running in Collingwood so that it's available for our residents. Certainly, as Councillor Jeffrey pointed out, not everyone is online, so we hope to have a phone number as well, and so that residents who are staying at home, who are either vulnerable or self-isolating, can abide by those restrictions and have a source of support for food and other essentials. So I think it's part of not only the community building and morale, and certainly there's many people in our community that are engaged in trying to find ways to reach out and become involved, but it also provides support to individuals so that they can isolate and stay out of the social world, and make sure that they're respecting the requirements, whether they be symptomatic or have been around somebody or just somebody who is compromised or susceptible. And so we want to make sure that we take care of our population, and hopefully that will be up and running very shortly. CAO?
Thank you, Your Worship. Just on commenting on the community outreach piece, we're also looking at greater utilization of radio ads, newspaper ads. We discussed that those communications channel at our department head this morning, and Adam is just working on some public service announcement in that regard, so we can reach a wider audience who don't have access to the internet. So radio and newspaper ads will start making their way into the system in the next day or so. Also, if I may comment on the consideration about restricting mobility, I think it's something that we can consider, but the practicality of that becomes problematic. It's really difficult for us to enforce that, and this has got to be a provincial initiative. And the other consideration I'll also ask Council to think about is that when we get over this and we want to rebuild, part of that will be attracting people and bringing in people into our community. So I think the motivation is absolutely well-intentioned. I just worry a bit about the implementation aspect of it and the kind of message you might be sending to the broader community.
Councillor Jeffrey?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I guess for me, it's just that sometimes it's the statement, like we're making statements about dog parks and about our playgrounds, but we can't enforce it. We know that some congregation is still going on in facilities, but sometimes just making the statement to have people understand that by going into other communities, you're putting others at risk. And I think we just have to become a lot more considerate of each other in the bigger picture. And so if that's, council has to have an appetite for it, but if that's just a letter to the province to say, can you make a statement about this? For me, I think if you don't speak up, then they don't know what's going on, or they don't.
And I guess just for clarity, what you're really looking for is renters, or you're not looking for weekenders or own who pay taxes in the community. What you're really trying to send out is those that have no connection to the community, that are just coming up and for the day or renting for the weekend. And we're trying to restrict that mobility, and I think the Premier's been pretty clear on that, but I agree. So I would look to the clerk then. Do we need some form of direction or to address Councillor Jeffrey's concern?
Through your worship, to Councillor Jeffrey and members of the council. I'm just reading the resolution that council just passed about petitioning the federal and provincial government and providing our letter to them. And we talk about various programs, including financial relief, but other programs, and we could include this concept in that correspondence if that's sufficient.
Does that work,
That,
Councillor?
that would be terrific.
Okay.
Thank you.
Is there anyone on council that has any concerns with that being included under the rubric? Councillor Hamlin. I need you to turn on, just activate your mic.
Right, thank you. I totally get the concern about overloading our hospital at this time of need, but I would say I would not be in favor of this unless, in any form, and adding any words, unless we had some real evidence that this is a problem. You know, I had to drive, I drove around the other day to just look how see our town's doing, and I would say our hotels do not seem to be fully occupied. In fact, there are no cars there, I would say, except perhaps for staff. I would want to make sure that we are not saying to our part-time residents to go home, because that would be a terrible thing for us to be expressing to people who consider Collingwood their home, maybe are spending 4 or 5 days a week here, but still have a foot in Toronto. We have a very unique community here, and I'm aware of some communities in Canada, like Tofino. I think they've told all their tourists to go home, but I believe the full-time population here is 300, if it's that. It's a sort of a different animal than what we're facing. And so, as I say, without real evidence for me that this is a problem in our community, I would not be in favor of this.
Councillor Jeffrey.
Yeah, no, just to clarify, I'm not suggesting for 1 minute that we're speaking about people who are taxpayers and are part-time residents in our community, but I have had calls, specific concerns. There's no way to enforce it, but they know there's extra cars in places. There's people that are unknown to them that are in, I would not say it if I did not know that it was happening.
Councillor Doherty? Yes, I'll get back to you. So I've got Councillor Doherty, and then I have Councillor Hamlin, or Councillor Gomi, and then I'll let Councillor Hamlin speak again.
Thank you, Your Worship. I do support Councillor Jeffrey's suggestion here, and I absolutely would not want to convey that our part-time residents and even visitors are not welcome. But Councillor Jeffrey's concern and the concern that she has heard from other members of the community, this has been experienced in other communities in Ontario. I know of members of the AMO board who have sent messages to their visitors and part-time residents that they should perhaps consider staying where their hospital service, where the base of their hospital services, and not to prevail upon smaller or not to prevail upon less smaller hospitals in smaller communities.
Thank you. Councillor Comey?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would not be in favor of including such wording because it's concerning to me, especially as emotions continue to escalate in the coming weeks, that we be very cognizant of any language or notions of who belongs in our town and who doesn't. This can also be true, let's say, at playgrounds. We know that for some children, being at home is not ideal. And perhaps they're over at the playground because it's the safest place for them to be at this time. But we can feel upon first blush of walking by, what are those kids doing out and who are their parents and who is here and who isn't. Many of our first responder families have had to make extraordinary measures to figure out how they will isolate as a family should this and that happen. And that might include that maybe kids are up here with grandma, or dad has to go here and mom has to go there. Family circumstances are complicated. And I've heard from some of our part-time residents that they're getting a side eye in the grocery store, or they're not sure if they belong here, and people are feeling paranoid about their movement. So I want to be extremely cautious that we move into any territory of belonging or community. I think Collingwood is a place that welcomes all, and it's such a complicated, unprecedented situation. I really don't want to touch that at all. There should be a time where our council, our community can look to us to have deep empathy and understanding of the myriad of circumstances people around the world are finding themselves in. So that's my take on that.
Do you want to say anything on that?
No, I'm just confident that it would be a statement that has to come out of the province and how they see Ontario dealing with that. It would not be specific to us. We're simply giving them a case, an example. And, you know, through Councillor Doherty's experience through AMO, we know we're not the only ones experiencing it. And I know we're not the only ones in Canada.
Councillor Hamlin, you had your hand up?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Really, I don't think I could say it any better than Councillor Comey said it. And I just want to reiterate, I've driven around. There's nobody in town right now. There's so few cars. And, you know, I would just, you know, as Councillor Comey said, I'd be so reluctant to try and figure out who we think belongs here and who doesn't. That's all I'll say.
I'll comment, and then I guess I will call the vote. I don't think, I mean, I think it has been a good discussion, and I don't think this is a discussion about trying to exclude the public from coming here. I think what it is, if I understand Councillor Jeffrey correctly, and she can tell me if I'm wrong, is it's a discussion about the continuum of social restraints right now. And so if we're getting people coming up for the day or coming up for the night, and they are here to see the town, and they are not isolating, they're not respecting social distancing, they're looking for food services or other things, our residents are being asked to self-isolate, to stay at home, to keep social contact to a minimum, and many of them have lost their jobs and are unemployed to do that. And so I think it is not a question about a xenophobic or us and them mentality. It's a question about the entire population of Ontario respecting the unprecedented times we're in. And I think that if we were in any community, I would be asking our residents in Collingwood not to travel to other communities for a day travel or to go to restaurants or anything else because of the unprecedented times they're in and other measures that we're doing. And if we don't adopt these measures collectively as a community, then we are putting each other at risk. And I think this is a question, in my mind, of respect, not of exclusion. And so for that reason, I would support this in the context of this discussion now. And absent the unprecedented times we're in with the pandemic, I don't think any of us would be having this discussion around the table. So with that being said, I will call the vote, and I think we're starting with you, Deputy Mayor.
Definitely opposed.
I am in favor. Councillor Hamlin?
Opposed.
Councillor Jeffrey?
In favor.
Councillor Berman?
In favor.
Councillor Doherty?
In favor.
Councillor Madigan?
In favor.
Councillor Comey?
Opposed.
Councillor McLeod?
Opposed.
Did you count all that? I think,
5-4.
yeah, I think it is 5-4. It is 5-4. So that is carried, and we're asking the province, we're asking staff to consider in their letters to the province to include a lobby to ask the people of Ontario to respect the social restrictions and not to travel to outside their communities while the pandemic is in place. Is there any other old or deferred business?
Ties in.
Sorry, other business. Okay, so Councillor Berman, go ahead.
I think it's just a clarification in the staff report on what we may or may not be doing. So when we're talking about bylaw and parking and what they're going to be doing, I don't have the understanding, I think, of anybody in this room as to what came into effect last night as far as what's considered essential and non-essential. And I was talking to the chief beforehand about the differences between what the OPP can enforce and so on and so forth. So I guess my question would be through you to the CAO is, are you currently looking at ways to enforce or to help enforce these things that what should be closed is closed? And
Yeah, thank you, Councillor, and through the mayor to you. We were having a discussion today, discussion may have already happened with the OPP in terms of enforcing. The position that we've taken is that that's the responsibility of the OPP, and because it's provincial regulation. But we're happy to collaborate and work with them to look at what we can do to help support the enforcement of of those bylaws. We're also looking at what's classified as essential and non-essential, because the list is quite extensive, and we're receiving some legal advice even within our own municipality on how we might be able to unpack some of that. So we are looking at working with the OPP on the implementation of it, and we're also looking at the whole area of what's defined as essential and non-essential. And some municipalities, for example, have deemed everything that they do to be essential, and therefore business as usual. We've taken a slightly different approach, but we're continuously looking at it to see that we're not contravening provincial regulation.
perfect, thank you.
All right, is there any old or deferred business? Councillor Hamlin. And I've got you too, Deputy Mayor. So go ahead, Councillor Hamlin.
Yes, thank you. This is still under other business. And in terms of the outreach, sorry, I think I've frozen here. In terms of the outreach, it's really just a comment through you, Mr. Mayor, to staff. One of the slides that our CAO presented spoke to the portal that was being put together as a coordinating exercise with social service organizations to facilitate supplies and volunteers and so on. And I just really wanted to offer that I hope that we would look to our adjoining municipalities in terms of reaching out beyond our borders, because we have so many volunteers that appear here in Collingwood on a regular basis that are coming from Wasaga and the town of Blue Mountains in particular. I know Pam Hillier, who I'm sure you've been in touch with in any event, Mr. Mayor, and also our CAO. She looks beyond our borders, and she was one of the people on the call I was with this morning. So I just urge that we don't make this just a Collingwood-centric reach, and that if we're looking at one of these portals, and I know there's a couple I've been made aware of, oh my goodness, what are they called? Caremongering.com and thedo.com. I guess these are the kind of sites that are starting to pop up, that we just don't, that we make it as broad as we can. That was all. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hamlin. And we're, Pam Hillier and Jennifer Parker are looking at the Grey Bruce model, which is the DO model. And so 211 would be involved in matching. So I would anticipate that it will go beyond our municipal borders.
Oh, that's fantastic. Thank you.
Is there any other business before I move on? Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor Saunderson. I apologize for doing this, but especially in light of the fact I think that this meeting overall has been very, very positive. But I have to say I'm extremely disappointed with what was just passed in a 5-4 vote. And I think that request has put staff in a very awkward position. And if they are to move forward in drafting some type of communication with the intent of sending it to an upper tier level of government, that it be brought back for council, and it be council that decides whether or not to actually send it forward, moving up to an upper tier.
Well, that's noted, and I guess we'll deal with staff. If a letter like that comes out, then it will be circulated to council. Is there any other business before I move on to old or deferred business? Seeing none, any old or deferred business? We do not have an in-camera session, so we're now on to the confirmatory bylaw, and that's moved by Deputy Mayor Hall and seconded by Councillor MacLeod. Be it resolved that the bylaw number 2020-22, being a bylaw to confirm the proceedings of the special meeting of council held March 25, 2020, be enacted and passed this 25th day of March 2020. So now I'm in favor. Councillor Hamlin?
In favor?
Thank you. Councillor Jeffrey?
In favor.
Councillor Berman?
In favor.
Councillor Doherty?
In favor.
Councillor Madigan?
In favor.
Councillor Comey?
In favor.
Councillor MacLeod?
Favor.
Deputy Mayor?
In favor?
And that is passed unanimously. And then I need a motion to adjourn. Thank you, Councillor Jeffrey. I'm not going to call the roll. All in favor, put your hands up. And that worked. Thank you very much, everyone. That was a history-setting meeting. So thank you for your time and all your hard work. Good night.